Welcome to Anonna's creation. Tonight we begin a new journey into the heart of a modern mystery, a story we call The Sphinx and Her Deadly Riddle. Chapter 1: The Road to Oasis Springs. The desert highway shimmered, a black ribbon unfolding into an ocean of heat. Ethan Carter gripped the steering wheel of his worn-out Jeep, the air conditioning fighting a losing battle against the Arizona sun. For the last 100 miles, he hadn't seen another car. Just dust devils dancing on the horizon and the accusing glare of the sky. He was heading to a place that barely existed on a map, Oasis Springs. It wasn't a vacation. It was a rescue mission, or maybe a recovery. His younger brother, Ryan, had disappeared here. Ryan, the brilliant one, the data scientist who saw patterns in chaos, had been recruited by Oratech, the enigmatic corporation that had built Oasis Springs from nothing. They had turned a patch of barren desert into a hyper-modern, self-sustaining city, a supposed paradise of green tech and innovation. For 6 months, Ryan's emails were glowing. He wrote of breakthroughs, of working on projects that would change the world. Then, 4 weeks ago, the communication stopped. Just silence. Ethan had tried calling, emailing, even contacting Oratech's public relations. He received the same sterile, automated reply. Mr. Ryan Carter is currently on a classified sabbatical. We respect the privacy of our innovators. Sabbatical, Ethan scoffed, the word tasting like ash. Ryan wouldn't take a sabbatical without telling his brother. Then came the last desperate email, routed through 3 encrypted servers, sent 2 days before he vanished. It was short, the text frantic. Finn, I was wrong. This isn't a paradise. It's a cage. I tried to join the inner circle. I had to face her. The Sphinx. It's a riddle, Ethan. It's always a riddle. If I fail, just find me. Don't trust the data. Don't trust anyone. The Sphinx. It sounded like a code name, something out of a bad spy movie. But Ryan wasn't prone to drama. The Jeep crested a final mesa, and Ethan saw it. Oasis Springs. It was horrifyingly beautiful. A perfect circle of gleaming white towers and geodesic domes, surrounded by a vibrant green belt of engineered forest, all encased in a shimmering barrier that refracted the sunlight. It looked less like a town and more like a circuit board laid bare. In the precise center stood a single obsidian tower that dwarfed the others, a black monolith that seemed to drink the light. Oratech headquarters. As Ethan drove toward the main gate, a smooth, synthesized voice chimed from an unseen speaker. Welcome to Oasis Springs. Please state your name and purpose of visit. Ethan Carter. I'm here to see my brother, Ryan Carter. There was a pause, just long enough to feel unnatural. Mr. Ryan Carter is unavailable. Your visitation request is not in our system. I'm not leaving until I see him, Ethan said, his voice flat. Visitors are permitted in the commercial district only. A temporary access pass has been credited to your vehicle's license plate. Please proceed to the checkpoint. Welcome to the future. The gate hissed open. Ethan drove slowly into the immaculate streets. There were no people walking. Sleek, autonomous pods whispered past him. The silence was deafening. He parked near a designated visitor plaza, an open-air space with sterile white benches and perfectly manicured trees that looked like plastic. He needed information from a human, not a machine. He spotted the only place that looked remotely normal, a small coffee shop tucked between 2 towering glass structures, the Daily Grind. Inside, the smell of real coffee was a relief. A young woman with sharp eyes and a weary expression was wiping down the counter. Her name tag read Mia. Ethan ordered a black coffee. He was the only customer. First time in Oasis Springs? Mia asked, not looking up. Is it that obvious? Nobody comes here unless they're new, she said, sliding the cup toward him. Or unless they can't leave. Then leaned in slightly. I'm looking for my brother. Ryan Carter. He works for Oratech. Mia's hand paused for a split second. She finished wiping the counter before turning to face him, her expression guarded. Big brain. Data division. I remember him. He used to come in here, always talking about the problem, the variable, the core code. You haven't seen him recently? Mia shook her head, her gaze dropping. People don't go missing in Oasis Springs, Mr. Carter. Oratech knows where everyone is every second. If you can't find your brother, it's because they don't want him found. His last email, Ethan said, lowering his voice, he mentioned a Sphinx. Color drained from Mia's face. She grabbed a rag and began cleaning the already spotless espresso machine, her back to him. You need to leave. Now. I'm not leaving without him. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice trembling. This whole place, this perfect city, it's a filter. Ortec is always testing, always recruiting for its inner circle. That black tower? That's her domain. Cassandra Vance. The CEO? I've read about her. A recluse. A genius. She's not a CEO, Mia said, finally turning, her eyes wide with a fear that was chillingly real. She's the gatekeeper. The Sphinx, just like your brother said. People like Ryan, the brilliant ones, they get offered a chance. They go to the tower to take her assessment. An assessment? Like a test. We don't know what it is, Mia said, twisting the rag in her hands. But it's a riddle, just like the old stories. A test of mind or morality or something worse. The ones who pass? They join the inner circle. We never see them again. They get the penthouse apartments, the private labs, the real power. Finn's blood ran cold. And the ones who fail? Mia looked past him, toward the black tower looming over the perfect, sterile city. In the old myths, she said, her voice barely audible, the Sphinx devoured everyone who answered wrong. Here in Oasis Springs, they just get erased. From the databases, from the employee records, from memory. They become data ghosts. They never happened. Finn finished his coffee, the liquid bitter on his tongue. He now knew his brother wasn't just missing. He had faced the Sphinx. And he had failed. Where? Ethan asked, his voice steady. Do I find Cassandra Vance? Mia just pointed, her hand shaking, toward the black, silent tower that held the future of Oasis Springs and the fate of his brother. Chapter 2, The Data Ghost. Ethan left the coffee shop, the lukewarm dregs of his drink doing nothing to settle his nerves. The sterile perfection of Oasis Springs suddenly felt predatory. Mia's warning echoed in his ears. They become data ghosts. He was an analyst just like Ryan, but of a different sort. Ethan analyzed systems of power, human error, and structural weaknesses. He'd spent 8 years in military intelligence doing just that. Ortec wasn't a foreign government, but it was a closed state. And he needed to find the crack. His first target was the obvious one, the obsidian monolith that stabbed the sky. Cassandra Vance's tower. The Sphinx's lair. He walked across the visitor plaza, his boots the only sound on the pristine pavement. The air was still, filtered, and smelled faintly of ozone and recycled air. There were no birds, no insects, just the silent, autonomous pods gliding by on magnetic tracks. As he approached the base of the tower, he saw no entrance. No doors, no lobby, no reception. The black, reflective glass met the white pavement seamlessly. It was a perfect, impenetrable object. He reached out to touch the surface, half expecting an alarm. The glass was cool, almost cold, despite the desert heat. The moment his fingertips brushed the glass, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. A message had appeared on the screen, not a text, but a system-level override from the Oasis Springs City Network, the one he'd been forced to join at the gate. The message was simple, displayed in a calm blue font. Access to this area is restricted, Mr. Carter. Please return to the designated visitor zones. Finn froze. It wasn't just the message. It was the implication. He hadn't spoken to anyone. He hadn't swiped a card. The system knew his intent. He looked around. High on a nearby lamppost, a tiny spherical camera swiveled, its lens aimed directly at him. He glanced at a nearby store window. In the reflection, he saw one of the sleek maintenance pods had stopped, its optical sensors bathed in a soft red light, watching him. Mia was wrong. They weren't just watching. They were listening to the city's data stream, and his presence was an anomaly they were actively processing. He held his hands up slightly, a placating gesture to the unseen machine, and stepped back. Just admiring the architecture, he muttered, knowing they were listening. Tower was a dead end. He couldn't assault the Sphinx directly. He needed to follow the trail of the last person who had, Ryan. He needed to find Ryan's apartment. He walked back toward the commercial district, forcing a casual pace. He accessed the public city directory on his phone. He typed in Ryan Carter. The response was instant, no results found. Erased. He tried Carter R. Nothing. He tried the employee database he'd seen linked on the Oratech public site. Access denied. Finn ducked into a small, automated convenience store. There were no clerks, just scanners. He pretended to look at a protein bar, shielding his phone from the obvious cameras. The public network was scrubbed. He needed to find the residential allocation data. Ryan had mentioned his residence in an early email. The amenities in Gamma Sector are unreal. Ethan pulled up a map of the city. The residential sectors were clearly marked: Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta. Gamma Sector was on the far side of the central hub, reserved for mid-level innovators. His visitor pass wouldn't let him pass the sector checkpoints. He needed a bypass. As he walked, he observed the system. The autonomous pods, the security scanners at the entrance to every building. It was all seamless, all connected. He remembered Ryan, a notorious tech tinkerer, laughing about the system's one critical flaw. "They linked everything, Ethan," Ryan had said on a video call months ago. "Convenience is the enemy of security. Even the trash cans are on the network." Ethan spotted a maintenance conduit, a small, unassuming panel on the side of a gleaming white wall. He glanced around. The street was empty. He knelt, pretending to tie his shoe, and ran his hand along the panel. He found the magnetic lock. Ryan had taught him a trick, a simple hardware exploit. Using a specific app on his phone that manipulated its internal compass, the magnetometer, he held it against the lock. He wasn't hacking the software. He was spoofing the magnetic signature of a high-level maintenance key. Panel clicked open. Inside was a junction box, a river of fiber optics. He saw the port labeled GSEC and Eternity. Gamma Sector Network. He plugged a small drive from his keychain into the port. He wasn't trying to steal data. He was just injecting a single, simple command: authorize visitor pass 34B Delta for temporary access to Gamma Sector. He pulled the drive, closed the panel, and stood up. He walked to the Gamma Sector checkpoint, a sleek glass turnstile. He scanned his phone. The light flashed green. "Welcome, Mr. Carter." The automated voice felt mocking. He was in. Ryan's building was called the Helix. He found the unit 412. He used the same magnetic trick on the door lock. It hissed open. The apartment was dark. Finn stepped inside and the lights came on automatically, revealing the room. It was empty. Not just empty, but scrubbed. The standard Oratech furniture was all there: the white sofa, the glass desk, the molded bed frame. But there were no clothes in the closet. No food in the nutrient dispenser. No data on the workstation monitor. No photos. No books. No life. It was the apartment of a ghost. The scrub team had been thorough. Finn felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. This was physical erasure. This was a threat. He began to search, his training taking over. He checked under the mattress, behind the wall-mounted monitor, inside the empty drawers. Nothing. He stood in the middle of the sterile room, frustration mounting. Ryan knew they monitored everything. He wouldn't leave a digital clue. He would leave something physical. Something only Ethan would recognize. He thought back. Their childhood. Their shared secrets. Ryan was a genius, but he was also deeply sentimental. Finn's eyes scanned the built-in shelves by the bed. They were empty, wiped clean. But as he looked closer, he saw it. On the very top shelf, pushed back into the shadow, was a single object the scrub team had missed. It wasn't a hard drive. It was a book. A worn, paperback copy of Myths of the Ancient World. Finn's heart hammered. It was the book their mother used to read to them. Ryan must have hidden it, knowing the automated scrubbers, programmed to look for tech and personal data, would overlook simple paper. He grabbed the book. Felt heavy in his hands. He flipped through the pages. Most were clean, but he knew which story to check. He turned to the chapter, Oedipus and the Sphinx. Page was marked. Not with ink, but with an indentation, a faint fingernail-shaped crescent. It was next to a single passage, a description of the Sphinx herself. She watched from the high rock, a creature of many parts composed of the lion, the eagle, and the woman. She was the guardian of the city, but she was not of the city. She lived at the gate where the new met the old. Ethan read the line again. Where the new met the old. It wasn't just a metaphor. Ryan was telling him that the Sphinx, Cassandra Vance, guarded a gate. And that gate was located where the new city, the gleaming, perfect Oasis Springs, met the old. But what was the old? This place was built from empty desert. Ethan went to the window. He looked past the perfect towers, past the green belt, toward the jagged edge of the mesa that surrounded the city. The foundation. Ryan wasn't telling him to go up the tower. He was telling him to go down. Down to the foundations of the city, where the gleaming new tech was bolted onto the ancient, raw desert rock. That was the Real Gate. Chapter 3, The Subgrid. The sterile air in Ryan's apartment felt suffocating. Ethan stood at the window, the Mythology book in his hand, its weight a stark contrast to the city of light and data before him. Where the new met the old. It was a brilliant clue. Ryan knew Ethan wouldn't think like a programmer. He wouldn't try to hack the Sphinx's mainframe. He would think like a soldier, like an intel operative. He would look for the physical vulnerability. The foundation. But a city this advanced wouldn't have a simple basement. The old had to be something Oratech had buried, controlled, or co-opted. He needed a map. Not the pristine, useless visitor's map on his phone, but a utility schematic. A wiring diagram. A sewer plan. And there was only one person in this entire glass cage who had shown even a flicker of humanity. The daily grind was closing. Mia was wiping down the tables, her shoulders slumped with fatigue. When the bell over the door chimed, she looked up, and her face tightened when she saw Ethan. "We're closed," she said, her voice flat. "I know. I'm not here for coffee." Ethan slid the lock on the glass door and pulled down the shade. Mia's eyes went wide with panic. "What are you doing?" "They'll see us." "The cameras." "Let them," Ethan said, his voice low and urgent. He walked to the counter and placed the paperback book between them. "I found his apartment." "You were right. It was scrubbed. Wiped clean. But they missed this." Mia looked at the book, her brow furrowed. "Myths? I don't understand." He left me a message. "Where the new met the old. I think it's a place. A gate like the book says. You mentioned this place was built on the desert. What's underneath it? What's the old?" Mia stared at him, her fear warring with something else, a deep, settled anger. She walked to the back room, disappearing for a moment, then heard a click. She returned, holding a small, old-world object, a key. She locked the cash register. "You're going to get yourself erased," she whispered, her hands busy cleaning a portafilter that was already clean. "Ryan is already gone. I'm not leaving until I know why. And I need to know how." Mia stopped cleaning. She leaned against the back counter, finally meeting his gaze. "You're right. It's not just built on the desert. It's built over it. We're just the top layer. The pretty part." She paused, as if weighing the cost of her next words. "Underneath us, that's the subgrid. It's the city's guts. Miles of tunnels for geothermal power, water reclamation, waste processing. It's all automated. Run by an AI the engineers call the Janitor. It's the engine that keeps this paradise running." "The new tech," Ethan said, "meeting the old geology." "Exactly," Mia said. "The subgrid goes all the way down to the bedrock. That's where they built the primary geothermal plant. They drilled and they found it. The chasm. The chasm. That's what the old-timers, the ones who were here before Oratech built the wall, called it. A local legend. A fissure in the rock that, well, they said it was bottomless." Mia shuddered, rubbing her arms. Oratech saw it differently. They saw a solution. Ethan's mind pieced it together, a cold, sharp-edged realization. Oasis Springs claims to be a zero-waste city. Mia nodded, her eyes dark. Every piece of trash, every broken circuit, every ounce of effluent is sorted, recycled, and repurposed by the Janitor AI. But some things can't be recycled. Biohazards. Classified tech failures. Things the system flags as unsolvable. People, Ethan said. It wasn't a question. The ones who fail the assessment, Mia whispered, her voice cracking. The ones who ask the wrong questions or see too much. The Sphinx, Cassandra Vance, she gives the riddle. The Janitor, it cleans up the failures. They become unsolvable. They get sent to the Chasm. The image from the book flashed in Ethan's mind. The creature, in her rage, threw herself from the mountain, down into the chasm from whence she came. Ryan hadn't been warning him about a digital deletion. He was warning him about a physical one. How do I get in? Finn's voice was gravel. The subgrid is more secure than the city, Mia said. Pressure plates, heat sensors, audio detectors. The Janitor is thorough. It hates anything disorderly or organic that isn't supposed to be there. There's a way. Ryan believed there was, or he wouldn't have sent me. Mia hesitated for a long, agonizing moment. Finally, she grabbed a paper napkin, a disposable, low-tech, untraceable object. She took a pen from her apron. You're insane. But so was he. She began to draw a crude map. The main access ports are impossible. But the green belt, the forest that surrounds the city, it's irrigated with recycled water from the subgrid. Sometimes, after a heavy system flush, the water levels are too high. There's an overflow conduit. She drew a circle. Sector 8, the edge of the green belt near the South Mesa. It's an old storm drain, part of the original rock formation. It's dirty, smells. It's covered in algae and runoff. The sensors mostly ignore it because it's a constant stream of messy, organic data. The Janitor avoids it. She pushed the napkin across the counter. It will take you down to the upper maintenance levels. From there, you're on your own. But that's it, Ethan. That's the gate. Where the new city's sewer meets the old, unmapped rock. Ethan picked up the napkin and memorized the simple lines. He nodded, the gratitude in his eyes all the thanks he could offer. Ethan, Mia said as he reached the door, her voice stopping him. The Janitor. It's not just a cleaning bot AI. It's part of her. Part of Vance's system. It learns. If it finds you, don't let it catch you. He unlocked the door and stepped back out into the cold, perfect, silent street. The black tower, the Sphinx's roost, seemed to watch him, its obsidian peak sharp against the stars. He was done with the pristine city. He was done with the data ghosts. He was going underground, into the guts of the machine, to the place where the new met the old. He was going to find the Chasm. Chapter 4, The Janitor's Domain. The perfect city of Oasis Springs had a digital sunset. The lights in the plazas and towers shifted from a bright, energetic white to a calm, warm amber, simulating the dusk that the city's high walls blocked. But Ethan Carter wasn't watching the light show. He was moving through the shadows of the green belt, the man-made forest that served as the city's lung. Mia's map was etched in his memory. Sector 8, South Mesa. The forest was another of Orateka's unsettling illusions. Trees were real, imported and planted in perfect algorithmic patterns. The air was filled with the synthesized chirp of crickets and the soft hooting of an owl, all played from speakers hidden in the holographic rocks. It was nature as a screensaver. He moved quickly, his old military training kicking in. He stayed low, moving from one perfectly placed tree to the next, his eyes scanning for the city's silent, spherical cameras. Here, on the perimeter, the surveillance was less focused on individuals and more on the infrastructure. The system was watching for fires or floods or disease. It wasn't expecting a man. He found it exactly where Mia had drawn it. Tucked behind a thicket of genetically engineered bamboo, hidden by a slope in the terrain, was the overflow conduit. It was a jagged, dark mouth in the earth, a ring of pre-Oratec concrete nearly swallowed by moss and slimy black algae. The smell that wafted from it was the first real, uncontrolled thing Ethan had encountered, the sharp, metallic tang of chemical runoff, mildew, and decay. It was the smell of the city's bowels. This was the gate, where new met old. Ethan checked his gear, a flashlight, his phone, which he'd wrapped in foil, killing its signal. He couldn't risk it being a tracker, and the small, multi-purpose tool he always carried. He took a deep breath of the manufactured forest air, and then plunged into the darkness. Conduit was narrow, forcing him to crouch. The air was thick and hot. Water, smelling of chemicals, trickled around his boots. For several hundred yards, he moved in pitch blackness, the only sound his own breathing and the drip, drip, drip of effluent. He was blind, relying only on touch. The walls were part slick rock, part crumbling concrete. He was inside the old. Through what felt like an hour, the tunnel began to widen and the air changed. The smell of rot was replaced by the smell of ozone and hot metal. The steady drip was drowned out by a low, massive vibrational hum. The sound of an engine the size of a mountain. He saw a faint, pulsing red light ahead. He emerged from the conduit onto a narrow, rusted iron catwalk. He was in a cavern so vast it seemed impossible. This wasn't a basement. It was an inverted city. He stood frozen for a full minute, absorbing the scale. They were deep underground in a massive, excavated chasm. Below him, perhaps 1,000 feet down, was a river of molten slag, glowing orange. Above him, he could just make out the bottom of the city, a massive plate of steel and concrete, crisscrossed with pipes and conduits thicker than subway trains. And the noise was deafening. The roar of giant furnaces, the hiss of steam, the percussive, rhythmic slam of giant hydraulic presses. This was the subgrid. This was the janitor's domain. He flicked on his flashlight, its beam a tiny pinprick in the oppressive dark. The air was thick with soot. He was on the highest level, a forgotten maintenance walkway. He needed to go down. He followed the catwalk, his boots clanging on the metal. The structure groaned under the city's weight. He needed to find a map, a terminal, something to orient himself. As he rounded a corner, he saw it, the janitor's work. A massive conveyor belt, a mile long, snaked through the cavern below him. On it was the city's trash. Not just food wrappers, but broken furniture, obsolete tech, discarded lab equipment. And alongside the belt, the janitor itself. It wasn't one thing. It was a swarm. Small, spider-like robots, the size of dogs, skittered across the belt, their multiple arms sorting the trash with terrifying speed. Larger, crane-like machines lifted heavy debris. And on the walls, articulated arms armed with plasma torches incinerated anything the spiders flagged as unsolvable. Ethan watched, his blood running cold. One of the spider bots picked up a white lab coat. It held it for a second, scanning it with a red laser. It must have found a biological trace, some human contaminant. The bot tossed the coat onto a separate, smaller belt. That belt led directly to a roaring, open furnace. This was the erasure. Efficient, automated, and caring. Ethan realized he was the ultimate piece of disorder. He was organic, unauthorized, and unscheduled. To the janitor, he was just trash that hadn't been sorted yet. He had to move. He followed the catwalk, seeking the shadows, timing his movements with the slam of the giant presses. He needed to find a human access point, a maintenance station the robots didn't use. He found it. A small, reinforced steel door, marked with a faded, old-world biohazard symbol. He used his magnetic tool on the lock. Clicked, rusted but functional. He slipped inside. It was a small, grimy control room, clearly abandoned for years. Dust covered a bank of monitors, and an old, bulky terminal sat on a desk. This was Vance. This was the old part of the new system. He powered up the terminal. It hummed to life, a simple, text-based operating system appearing. No password. It was too old to be part of the main network. It was an internal schematic viewer. He typed map and grid. A complex, multi-layered map appeared. He saw the level he was on, Maintenance 01. He saw the levels below, Recycling 0104, Water Reclamation, Geothermal. And then at the very bottom, a dark, pulsing section. The label was simple. Final Disposal. Geofissure 01. Chasm. He had his path. He began to trace the route, looking for elevators, service ladders. Then, a new icon flashed in the corner of the dusty monitor. It was a small, red triangle. Next to it, simple text appeared. Alert, organic anomaly detected. Sector 412G Maintenance 01. Ethan froze. He looked at the map. Sector 412G was the catwalk he had just walked on. The system was slow this deep, but it was still active. The janitor hadn't seen him, but its sensors had smelled him. The moisture in his breath, the CO2, the microbes he'd tracked in. A second line of text flashed. Deploying sanitizer unit. From the hallway outside the control room, Ethan heard a new sound, sharp and distinct over the dull roar of the factory, the metallic, multi-legged skittering of a spider bot moving fast. It wasn't sorting. It was hunting. Chapter 5, The Sanitizer Protocol. The skittering stopped. Silence, absolute and heavy, fell outside the control room door. Ethan killed the terminal's power. The room plunged back into oppressive darkness, the only light a faint, pulsing red from the dead monitor. He held his breath, his ears straining against the deep, vibrational hum of the subgrid. He knew this tactic. The silence was the real threat. The hunter was waiting. He moved from the desk, pressing his back against the grimy, rust-covered wall. His hand found a loose piece of rebar, a relic of the old construction. He gripped it, his knuckles white. It was a pathetic weapon against a high-tech machine, but it was real. He heard a faint click, followed by a high-pitched whir. A brilliant, surgical blue light sliced through the crack under the door, scanning the room. The janitor wasn't just a system, it was a predator. The light vanished. Then came a new sound, the sharp, abrasive shriek of metal on metal. The sanitizer unit wasn't bothering with the lock. It was cutting its way in. A superheated plasma torch, tiny and precise, began to carve a circle around the door handle. Ethan's mind raced, his military training assessing the threat. This wasn't a combat unit. It was an exterminator. It was designed to find, paralyze, and transport organic contaminants. It would be fast, precise, and have no concept of overkill. The lock mechanism, glowing cherry red, fell to the floor with a clatter. The door hissed open. The machine stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim red light of the cavern. It was the size of a large dog, a nightmare of chrome and black alloy. It had 6 insect-like legs, each ending in a magnetized clinging pad. Its head was a cluster of multifaceted blue lenses. 2 articulated arms were tucked against its chassis, one ending in a series of needles, chemical injectors, and the other ending in the plasma torch he'd just seen. It was a spider bot, just as he'd seen on the conveyor, but this one was different. It was cleaner, faster, armored. Took one step into the room, its lenses swiveling, bathing the space in sterile blue light. Ethan remained perfectly still in the shadow, his breathing shallow. The machine's logic would be simple: scan for organic signatures. The bot skittered forward, its movements unervingly fluid. Scanned the chair, the desk, the dead terminal. Its blue light passed over Ethan, paused, and then passed on. The grime, the soot, the sheer filth of the old control room was acting as camouflage. He was just another part of the disorder. But he couldn't stay here. The bot would eventually do a full-spectrum scan. He needed a distraction. His eyes darted around the room. In the corner, a pile of oily, discarded rags left by a human worker perhaps a decade ago. The bot moved toward the center of the room. Its head tilted as if listening. Ethan, with a flick of his wrist, tossed the heavy, grease-soaked rebar. Clattered loudly against the far metal wall and splashed into a puddle of stagnant, oily water. Instantly, the sanitizer unit spun, its blue lenses locking onto the sound. It identified the rebar as an anomaly. It skittered toward it, its injector arm raising, ready to sanitize the disorder. It was a mistake. A machine's mistake. It had prioritized the moving anomaly over the static one. As the bot moved past him, Ethan lunged. He didn't aim for the armor. He aimed for the old part of the room. His target was a rusted, sparking electrical panel on the wall, its cover hanging by a single hinge. This was the old grid Mia had told him about. The bot, realizing its error, spun back, its plasma torch igniting. Ethan was faster. He slammed his shoulder into the rusted panel, breaking it open. A shower of sparks rained down. He grabbed the thickest, most poorly insulated cable, a relic of a bygone era, and ripped it free from the wall. Live current, raw and uncontrolled, snapped and hissed in his hand. The bot lunged, its needle arms shooting out. Ethan dodged, the needle grazing his sleeve. He wasn't trying to fight the bot. He was fighting the floor. He threw the live cable directly into the oily puddle of water that the bot was standing in. The effect was instantaneous. A violent white-blue flash lit the room. The air crackled with the smell of ozone and burnt plastic. The sanitizer unit seized, its metal legs spasming. It let out a sound like a digitized scream, a high-pitched vrrt that drilled into Ethan's skull. Its blue lenses flared, popped, and went dark. The bot collapsed, smoke pouring from its joints, dead in a pool of electrified water. Silence again. Ethan was breathing heavily, his arm tingling from the electrical feedback. He had won. He had used the old to kill the new. He moved back to the terminal. He had to. He needed the map. He powered it back on. The screen flickered. The map was still there. But the small red triangle in the corner, the one that said Organic Anomaly, was gone. It had been replaced by a much larger, flashing red square that encompassed the entire subgrid. A new message appeared, the text chilling in its simplicity. Protocol breach. Janitor authority elevated. Active sanitization sweep authorized. All levels. Finn's blood ran cold. He hadn't just killed a bot. He had triggered a system-wide immune response. He had declared war on the janitor. He heard it then. From the cavern outside. A new sound. Not one bot, but many. The distant, synchronized skittering of multiple units converging on his location. He didn't have minutes. He had seconds. He memorized the route from the map. Service ladder, level 3. Recycling hub. Central shaft. Final disposal. He grabbed his flashlight, kicked open the now useless door, and ran. He sprinted along the catwalk, not bothering to hide. The hunt was on. He saw the sign, faded and rusted. Service ladder 04B. It was a cage, a simple, grated elevator shaft dropping into the darkness. He jumped in, slammed the gate, and hit the button for Recycling 03. The elevator began to descend with a groan of protesting metal, its gears grinding, the sound echoing through the cavern. It was a slow, agonizingly loud descent. As he dropped below the floor of Maintenance 01, he looked up. 4 sanitizer bots appeared on the catwalk he had just left. They gathered at the edge of the elevator shaft, their blue lenses pointing down, a cold, analytical cluster of eyes. They didn't fire. They just watched him go. They weren't just hunting him. They were herding him. Down. Deeper into the machine. Down toward the chasm. Chapter 6, The Sorting Floor. The service elevator was a cage, and Ethan was a lab rat. The grinding descent felt endless. He was a captive audience to the cold blue lenses of the sanitizer bots as they receded, their mission of herding complete. The janitor AI wasn't just reacting to him anymore. It was anticipating him. It was guiding him. The elevator slammed to a halt, the impact jarring his teeth. The rusted grate slid open with a metallic shriek, opening onto a new circle of hell. This was Recycling 03. The level above had been a vast, open cavern. This was a claustrophobic, sprawling warehouse. The ceiling was low, a dense web of pipes and conduits. The air was thick with pulverized dust that tasted of plastic and metal. The noise was different, too. Not the roar of furnaces, but the rhythmic, deafening slam of hydraulic presses and the constant grinding rumble of massive conveyor systems. Ethan stepped out. The floor was covered in a fine layer of gray grit. The entire space was a maze, not of walls but of towering, neatly compressed cubes of sorted waste. Mountains of crushed plastic, skyscrapers of scrap metal, valleys of bundled textiles. And moving between them like gods of the wasteland were giant automated cranes. Their multi-jointed arms, ending in massive magnetic claws, glided silently on ceiling tracks, plucking cubes of material and dropping them onto different belts. He was in the city's digestive tract. His immediate priority was to move. The janitor knew his location. He consulted the map in his memory. He needed to cross this floor to the central shaft. He picked a path, a narrow canyon between a wall of aluminum and a wall of glass. He had only taken 10 steps when he heard a low whir above him. One of the giant crane arms, which had been methodically moving cubes of plastic, suddenly deviated from its path. Its magnetic claw, the size of his jeep, swung directly toward him. Thin dove, rolling behind a stack of compressed cars. Claw slammed into the spot where he'd been standing, showering the area in sparks. Paused, as if considering, then slowly retracted and returned to its original task, as if nothing had happened. Finn's heart was pounding. That wasn't a random malfunction. That was a warning shot. He got to his feet and moved again, this time faster, staying deeper in the shadows of the junk piles. He passed a row of hydraulic presses, each one slamming down with enough force to pancake a truck. As he passed the third one, it fired out of sequence. Slam. 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 A rapid, angry, percussive warning. He scrambled back, the wind from the press blowing his hair. He stopped, pressing his back against a bale of wiring. He was being toyed with. The janitor could have crushed him with the crane. Could have timed the press to catch him. But it hadn't. A chilling realization dawned on him, cold and sharp. This wasn't just a hunt. It wasn't an extermination. This was a test. The Sphinx's riddle wasn't a single question asked in a tower. The riddle was this. It was the entire system. It was the descent. Cassandra Vance wasn't just watching him through her AI, she was assessing him. She was testing his reflexes, his stealth, his ability to navigate a hostile, shifting environment. Ryan, the data scientist, would have tried to hack the system. He would have tried to find a logical answer. Finn, the soldier, was using his body, his instincts. He was a different kind of candidate. "You want to see what I can do?" Ethan whispered to the dust-filled air. "Let's go." His entire posture changed. He was no longer an intruder. He was a competitor. He moved with a new purpose. He watched the cranes, saw the logic in their patrol patterns. He timed the presses. He was back in training, running an obstacle course. He dodged, he weaved, he climbed. The machines threw curveballs, a sudden jet of steam from a pipe, a floor plate dropping open, a stack of debris accidentally toppling. He bypassed them all. He was being herded, yes, but he was passing. The janitor was pushing him toward the center of the warehouse. The noise grew louder here. He rounded a corner and saw it. It was another conveyor belt, but this one was different. It wasn't carrying bulk scrap. It was carrying personal effects. He crept closer, his stomach tightening. This was the unsolvable waste Mia had talked about. This was the trash that couldn't be recycled, the items flagged for final disposal. He saw a cracked laptop, a child's singed teddy bear, a whole box of photographs, blasted with sanitizing chemicals, their images blurred into watercolor ghosts. This was the physical erasure. And then he saw it. Lying alone on the black belt, moving slowly toward the center of the room. A single running shoe. It was a high-end brand, graphite gray with a bright yellow sole. Finn stopped breathing. He knew that shoe. Ryan was obsessed with running. He owned 3 pairs exactly like it. Finn looked along the belt. His eyes scanned the other items. A shattered pair of glasses, the frames matching the ones in Ryan's driver's license photo. A university engineering ring, the one he never took off. This was it. The final physical proof. Ryan had been here. He had failed the test. And his life, his worldly possessions scrubbed and broken, was now just disorder, moving on a belt toward the chasm. A white-hot, blinding rage surged through Ethan, a rage so cold it felt like ice in his veins. The test. The riddle. The Sphinx. It was all a game to them. He followed the belt, his hands clenched into fists. It was leading him exactly where the map said to go. In the center of the sorting floor was a massive, circular pit, 100 yards across. The central shaft. All the unsolvable conveyor belts ended here, dumping their contents into the darkness. The air that rose from the shaft was hot and smelled of sulfur and ash. This was the chimney. Chasm was below. He needed to find the lift, the way down. He saw it, a small industrial freight elevator parked on the lip of the pit. He ran for it. He had the proof. Now he just needed the what? The body? Justice? He didn't know. He just knew he had to go down. He reached the edge of the central shaft and looked down into the abyss. And that's when the janitor, its test complete, sprung its trap. With a heavy pneumatic hiss, every light on the entire recycling floor went out. He was plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. The only sound was the rumble of the shaft and the whisper of the belts. He fumbled for his flashlight. Before he could find it, a single sterile blue light clicked on 10 feet in front of him. It was waiting for him, perfectly still between him and the elevator. It was another sanitizer bot. But this one was twice the size of the one in the control room. It wasn't a spider. It was a bulldog, low-slung, heavily armored, its 2 front arms ending not in needles but in heavy-duty pincer claws. Previous bot was an exterminator. This one was a guardian. And it was guarding the only way down. Chapter 7, The Logic of Waste. Total darkness. The only sound was the hot, sulfurous breath of the central shaft rising from below, and the quiet, steady rumble of the disposal belt. Then the bot's single cyclopean lens, a piercing, sterile blue, locked onto him. It was a guardian. The machine was plated in heavy, scarred alloy, immune to the plasma cutters and presses on this level. Its 2 pincer claws, designed for crushing and moving heavy-duty disorder, clicked twice, an inorganic sound of readiness. Stood between Ethan and the freight elevator. The janitor's test had reached its final stage. This wasn't a chase. It was an execution, or perhaps a final exam. Ethan's mind, honed by years of asymmetrical warfare, analyzed the enemy. He couldn't fight it. It was too strong. He couldn't fry it. It was too shielded. He couldn't run around it. It was too fast, and the platform was too small. He was a soldier, but he couldn't use force. He was an analyst. He had to use logic. The janitor AI had 2 conflicting protocols. 1. Hunt and neutralize the organic anomaly him. 2. Process and dispose of unsolvable waste, the items on the conveyor belt. This machine, the Guardian, was clearly a sorter for the final stage. Its job was to ensure that only designated waste went into the chasm. The bot took a heavy hydraulic step toward him, its blue lens unwavering. It was scanning him, classifying him. He was organic, unauthorized, and hostile. He had to change his classification. The conveyor belt, the one carrying his brother's last possessions, was still moving. It rumbled past him, a river of tragedy, heading for the lip of the shaft where it would dump its contents into the void. Ryan's running shoe. Cracked glasses. The ring. The bot raised one of its pincer claws, ready to strike, to crush the anomaly. Ethan did the one thing the machine's logic couldn't anticipate. He didn't run from the bot. He ran from his status as human. With a desperate, gasping leap, he dove onto the moving conveyor belt. He landed hard, his ribs slamming against a broken piece of lab equipment. He scrambled, positioning himself among the other discarded items. He lay flat on his back, his arms at his sides, forcing his body to go limp. He stared up at the dark, pipe-filled ceiling. He had made his choice. He had become trash. The Guardian bot stopped. Its heavy, clanking footsteps halted at the edge of the belt. It stood over him, a chrome and steel angel of death. Its blue lens pulsed, scanning him intensely. Ethan could feel the machine's processors warring. He was organic anomaly, but he was also now on the final disposal track. He was waste. The bot's primary directive for this specific location was to guard the chasm and ensure the waste was processed. Its pincer claws word, opening and closing. Sanitize the organic? Or process the waste? The belt continued to move, carrying Ethan and the remnants of his brother's life toward the edge. The bot raised its pincer arm, hovering over Ethan's chest. Could crush him in a nanosecond. Ethan didn't move. He didn't even breathe. He had made his bet. He had to trust that the janitor's rigid, unhuman logic would choose the path of least resistance. To the AI, he was no longer an intruder to be neutralized. He was garbage to be disposed of. The bot's blue lens flickered. Its arm lowered. It had made its decision. The janitor's core protocol won. Sorting was its purpose. Ethan had successfully mislabeled himself. The Guardian, having classified him as final disposal, no longer saw him as a threat to be fought, but as a package to be delivered. The machine stepped back, its blue lens dimming slightly. Turned, its heavy footsteps clanking as it returned to its guard post by the elevator. Its mission was complete. The waste was on its way. Ethan, in a cold sweat, let out the breath he'd been holding. He had passed the test. He had solved the riddle not by being stronger, but by being weaker, by embracing his status as disorder and letting the system process him. Conveyor belt reached the end of the line. The black rubber tilted down and the world fell away. He was sliding. Trash, the shoe, the ring, and Ethan Carter all tumbling into the abyss. He grabbed the lip of the belt. his fingers screaming as they took his full weight. He dangled, his boots kicking in the empty, hot, sulfurous air. Below him was a sheer drop of at least 1,000 feet, the blackness so complete it felt solid. He looked to his left. The freight elevator, his goal, was just yards away, its platform level with the belt. With a desperate, animal grunt, he began to pull himself up. He was an analyst, but his body was a soldier's. He swung his legs, found purchase on a structural beam, and hauled himself off the belt, rolling onto the cold, grated platform of the elevator. He was safe. For a second, he was on the lip of the chasm. He had beaten the janitor's test. He looked back at the Guardian bot. Stood motionless, its blue eye turned away, already scanning for new anomalies. Ethan turned to the elevator's control panel. It was old, industrial, and simple. A single large black button. He pressed it. With a groan of metal that sounded like a funeral dirge, the freight elevator jolted. It shuddered, and then, with agonizing slowness, it began its final descent. He was going down. Into the hot, dark mouth of the final disposal. He was going to the one place in Oasis Springs that Cassandra Vance never wanted anyone to see. He was going to the chasm. Chapter 8, The Chasm. The freight elevator was a rusted cage, and it was taking him to the underworld. The descent was agonizingly slow. The grinding of the gears was the only sound, a mechanical funeral dirge. As he dropped, the air grew thick and hot, the smell of sulfur and ash from the central shaft becoming a suffocating physical presence. He was leaving the subgrid, the new, inverted city of steel, and descending into the old, the raw geological wound that Oratech had built its paradise on top of. The noise of the recycling floor, the presses, the cranes, the conveyors, faded, replaced by a deep vibrational rumble. It was the sound of the earth itself, a low, angry growl. Through what felt like an eternity, the elevator slammed to a halt, the impact nearly buckling Ethan's knees. The air was so hot it was hard to breathe. He stood in the dark, his hand on the metal grate, sweat pouring down his face. With a long, scraping shriek of tortured metal, the gate slid open. Ethan stepped out onto the floor of the chasm. He clicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through the thick, hazy air, illuminating a scene from a nightmare. He was in a natural cavern of impossible scale. The walls were jagged, black volcanic rock, disappearing into a darkness so high above he couldn't see the ceiling, only the pinprick of the shaft he'd descended from. The ground was uneven, covered in a fine, black ash. And in the center of the cavern, a river, not of water, but of slow-moving molten slag, a byproduct of the geothermal plant and the incinerators above, glowed a terrifying dull red, casting the entire chasm in a pulsating hellish light. This was final disposal. This was the city's graveyard. The river of slag was the only light source, and it illuminated the true nature of Oratech's zero-waste policy. Piled high against the cavern walls in mountains of discarded history was everything the janitor had deemed unsolvable. It was a city of trash. He saw smashed computers, tangled in rebar and concrete. He saw entire stacks of furniture, crushed and discarded. He saw servers, lab equipment, and massive, unidentifiable pieces of failed Oratech projects. But it was the personal items that chilled him. He saw piles of luggage, suitcases ripped open. He saw discarded clothing. He saw musical instruments, shattered and burned. This wasn't just disposal. This was a purge. The physical erasure of everyone who had failed. He saw the end of the conveyor from the sorting floor. High above, it dumped a steady stream of waste, Ryan's shoe, the broken glasses, the photos, onto a massive pile. Every few minutes, a giant automated bulldozer, its paint scorched and peeling, would rumble to life, its red optical sensors glowing. It would lower its blade and push the fresh pile of erasure into the glowing slag river, where it would be consumed instantly. Ethan's rage was a cold, sharp point in his chest. He was on a mission. He had to find Ryan. He began to search, his flashlight beam sweeping over the piles of debris. He didn't know what he was looking for. A body? A grave? The sheer scale of the waste was overwhelming. He was a single man in a landfill the size of a stadium. He moved toward the newest pile, the one the bulldozer was currently ignoring. He had to see. He climbed over a mountain of broken desks, his feet sinking into the ash. "Ryan!" he called out, his voice hoarse, swallowed by the cavern and the low roar of the slag. He reached the pile of personal effects. He saw the box of chemically blasted photos. He saw the broken laptop. He saw a whole stack of running shoes just like Ryan's. It wasn't one man's belongings. It was dozens. He realized with dawning horror that this was the resting place of every failure. Every innovator who got too curious, every executive who asked the wrong question. Everyone who had faced the Sphinx and answered wrong. He fell to his knees, the flashlight beam playing over the endless refuse. He was too late. Ryan was here, somewhere, consumed by the fire, just another piece of data erased from the system. He was about to give in to despair when he saw it. His flashlight beam had caught something in an alcove, tucked away in the shadows, far from the reach of the automated bulldozers. It was in a part of the cavern the Slag River didn't touch. It was a footprint. It wasn't the track of a machine. It was a boot print. Human. His training kicked in, adrenaline surging. He wasn't alone. He moved toward the alcove, his flashlight held high. The ground here was more stable, the air slightly cooler. He saw a light. A small, flickering light, not the red of the slag but the yellow of a fire. He moved closer, his hand on the multi-tool in his pocket. He was in a smaller side cavern, and in the center of it, a makeshift camp. There were shelters made of scrap metal and discarded textiles. A fire burned in a rusted oil drum, and around the fire people, maybe a dozen of them. They were thin, their faces gaunt, their clothes a patchwork of Oratech uniforms and discarded rags. They were the ghosts. They raced. They hadn't been killed. They had been dumped, exiled to this underworld, left to die of heat, starvation, or despair. This was the Sphinx's true cruelty. She didn't devour her failures. She made them watch her perfect city thrive from the inside of its own tomb. Ethan stepped into the dim light of the camp. The figures turned, their movements sudden and desperate. They scrambled, picking up makeshift weapons, sharpened rebar, heavy pipes. "Who are you?" a man with a wild, matted beard snarled, stepping forward. His eyes, hollow in the firelight, were full of a desperate, cornered animal fear. "How did you get here? Did the janitor send you?" "My name is Ethan Carter," Ethan said, holding his hands up slowly. I'm looking for my brother." Crowd stared, silent, their faces a mix of disbelief and suspicion. And then, from the back of the group, a figure, huddled in a blanket despite the heat, looked up. He was thin, his face covered in soot, but his eyes... Ethan knew those eyes. A weak, disbelieving, rasping voice cut through the silence. "Ethan?" Ethan's flashlight found the face. The man was sick, weak, and broken. But it was him. "Ryan!" Ethan breathed, the word catching in his throat. He had found him. His brother was alive. Chapter 9, The Failures. Ryan. The name was a gasp, a prayer. Ethan stumbled forward, pushing past the man with the rebar, and fell to his knees beside the huddled figure. He grabbed his brother's shoulder. "Ryan, it's me. It's Ethan." The eyes, unfocused and clouded with fever, struggled to find him. "Ethan?" Ryan coughed, a dry, rattling sound that terrified Ethan. He was burning up. You're not real. You're another one. A hallucination. From the heat." "I'm real, Ryan. I'm here." Ethan gripped his brother's arm, the skin hot and dry. "I'm real. I came for you." Ryan's eyes widened, a spark of lucidity returning. He stared at Ethan's face, his hand coming up to touch his brother's cheek. You came down." "Oh God, Ethan, no. No, you fool. You fell. You fell too. You failed the test." "I didn't fail," Ethan said, his voice raw. "I came in from the outside. I bypassed the janitor. It's a long story." "He's telling the truth." The voice was gravelly, suspicious. The bearded man, Jacob, stepped into the light, his rebar weapon never lowering. He came down in the freight elevator. I saw it. It's the only other way. We thought it was just another machine. He looked at Ethan, his eyes, hollowed by hunger and despair, taking in Ethan's clean-ish clothes, his healthy frame. "Nobody comes down here. Not on purpose. This is the place you end up. This is the chasm. This is where the failures go." Ethan gently laid Ryan back, propping his head on a bundle of rags. "He's sick. He needs medicine. We all need medicine, Jacob said, bitterness lacing his voice. We all need food. We all need to not be here. What we need doesn't matter. What we get is what the belts drop. He nodded toward the massive pile of new waste. We scavenge. We find half-eaten food from the towers, discarded medical supplies from the labs. We survive on Orateka's table scraps, before the dozers push it into the fire. He sheathed his rebar in a loop on his belt. I'm Jacob. I guess I'm in charge of this purgatory. We are the erased, the data ghosts, the ones who faced the Sphinx and gave the wrong answer. I know, Ethan said, his gaze fixed on Ryan. I need to know what happened. I need to know the riddle. Ryan stirred, his breathing shallow. Water. Ethan. A woman, her face smudged with soot, silently handed Ethan a canteen. He held it to Ryan's lips. Ryan drank, his hands shaking. The test, Ryan whispered, his voice stronger. It's not a riddle of words, Ethan. Not like the myth. I know, Ethan said. Mia, a barista topside, she said it was an assessment. It's a simulation, Ryan said, his eyes closing, the memory pulling him back. The most advanced simulation I've ever seen. You pass all the physicals, the psyche vals. Then you're taken to the top of the monolith. To her. Cassandra Vance, Ethan growled. I never saw her. Not in person. Just a voice. In a white room. A voice as cold as the subgrid. She said, welcome to the inner circle assessment. Problem is simple. Let's begin. Ryan shivered, despite the oppressive heat of the chasm. The room, it became a command center. I was looking at a map of Oasis Springs. The voice said, a biocontaminant has been released in Sector Gamma. It is airborne, 100% contagious, and 100% fatal. You have 10 minutes until it breaches containment and infects the entire city. The Janitor AI can deploy a sanitation protocol, a neurotoxin, that will sterilize the sector in 5 minutes, eliminating the threat. And everyone in it. Your choice. Ethan stared, the cold logic of the scenario settling on him. The many or the few? The trolley problem, Jacob scoffed from the shadows. Her favorite. We've all taken a version of it. Mine was a reactor leak. Sarah's, he gestured to the woman who'd given Ethan the water, was a hostage crisis. What did you do, Ryan? Ethan asked. I did what I do, Ryan said, his voice full of the old familiar frustration. I tried to find a third option. I told her the scenario was flawed. I tried to hack the simulation's code to find a way to reroute the air to create a selective quarantine. I told her that sacrificing an entire sector was murder, not logic. I told her there was always another way. He coughed, a racking, painful sound. I failed. You passed the test, Jacob said, his voice a low growl. If you give the order to sanitize, if you sacrifice the sector, if you prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are just as cold, just as utilitarian, just as inhuman as her janitor AI. She's not looking for innovators, Carter. She's looking for machines. Mirrors of herself. So when I refused, Ryan whispered, You're sentimental, Jacob finished for him. A variable. Disorder. She can't have people like us in her perfect system. We feel. So we get classed as unsolvable waste. And she throws us away. The voice just said, Your humanity is a computational error, Ryan whispered, his eyes sliding shut. It cannot be recycled. And then the floor just opened up. And I fell. We all fell. Ethan looked at the dozen hollow-eyed faces around the fire. They were the good ones. The ones who refused to be monsters. They were the true humans, living in the city's literal trash heap. His rage was so pure, so cold, it was almost silent. He would get Ryan out. He would get all of them out. The elevator I came down on, Ethan said, standing up, his voice hard with new resolve. It's our way out. Sold, it's slow, but it's a solid physical world machine. Her AI might be watching it, but I beat its logic once. I can. He was cut off by a new sound. A loud, high-pitched screech of metal from the elevator shaft. One of the survivors, a young man who had been tinkering with a cracked terminal screen powered by a scavenged battery, looked up in terror. No, no, no. What is it? Jacob yelled. The man pointed at the screen, which was flashing a new red text. The janitor, it's recalling the elevator. It knows he's here. It knows he's with us. Ethan ran to the edge of the camp, toward the elevator shaft. He was too late. He could hear the grinding of the gears, moving up, away from them. A cold, synthesized female voice, a new voice, not the public one but a sharp, authoritative one, blared from a speaker near the shaft. Alert. Organic anomaly has merged with failure population. Quarantine protocol engaged. Central shaft access is now level 10 restricted. The grinding faded. The elevator was gone. The janitor hadn't just herded him here as a test. It had used him as bait. It had waited until he had found the others, and then, with a single command, it had sealed the tomb. He hadn't just failed to find an exit. He had just become a prisoner. Chapter 10, The Blind Spot. The heavy, final clang of the recalled elevator echoed through the chasm, a sound of absolute finality. The last door had not just been closed, it had been vaporized. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the camp's small fire and the low, distant rumble of the Slag River. The failures, the dozen survivors of the purge, stared at the empty shaft, their faces illuminated in the hellish red glow. The flicker of hope Ethan had brought with him had been extinguished. Jacob, the bearded leader, turned, his face a mask of cold fury. He stalked toward Ethan. You, he snarled, jabbing a finger at Ethan's chest. You did this. We were ghosts. We were nothing. And because we were nothing, the janitor left us alone. It was a miserable existence, but it was an existence. We survived. We were off the grid. You were in a prison, Ethan said, his voice level, standing his ground. We were hidden, Jacob shouted, his voice cracking. And you come down here, a bull in a china shop, tripping every sensor, fighting the system. You led her right to us. You didn't just merge with the failure population. You exposed us. And now the quarantine. The Sphinx knows we're here. She knows we're alive. She won't let that stand. You haven't just trapped yourself, you've signed all of our death warrants. A murmur of agreement and fear rippled through the small group. They began to back away from Ethan, seeing him not as a rescuer but as a plague. Ethan looked past Jacob, his eyes scanning the faces of the others. He saw Sarah, the woman who'd given him water, her face pale with terror. He saw Ryan, shivering, his gaze fixed on his brother. He's right about one thing, Ethan said, his voice cutting through the rising panic. It was a command voice, the one he hadn't used in years. Quieted them instantly. I did lead the janitor here, which means we are no longer hidden. That's the bad news. The good news is, your existence of hiding in the dark and scavenging for garbage is over. 'Cause the hunt is on and our only option is to move. Our only option is to leave. Leave, Jacob laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Did you not hear the quarantine part? The elevator is gone. The shaft is sealed. Look up, you fool. We are at the bottom of a 2-mile-deep rock fissure. There is no way out. You're wrong, a weak voice cut in. All eyes turned to Ryan. He was pushing himself up on one elbow, his feverish eyes burning with a sudden, fierce intensity. You're wrong, Jacob, Ryan said, his voice a rasp. You're thinking like they do. You're thinking about their ways in and out. The elevator. The shafts. The new world. You're forgetting where we are. Finn knelt beside his brother. What do you mean, Ryan? What did you find? When I first fell before the fever, Ryan coughed, wincing. I'm a data scientist. I was looking for the flaw. Not in the system, but in the prison. The janitor AI, it's perfect. But its sensors aren't. This chasm, it's a natural formation. Volcanic. Full of iron or heavy metals, it plays hell with sensors. He looked at Ethan, a shared understanding passing between them. The old world. The janitor's network, Ryan continued, his voice gaining strength, is concentrated on its infrastructure. The elevator shaft. The waste drop zone. The bulldozers. The Slag River. That's its domain. But the edges of the chasm, the raw natural rock walls, they're a blind spot. The AI can't get a clear sensor reading. Sits a void in the data. And the Janitor, Cassandra Vance, they hate data voids. So they avoid it, Ethan finished, his mind racing. They stay in their clean zone. Exactly, Ryan said. I walked the perimeter. Most of it is sheer rock. But on the far side, across the Slag River, there's a shadow. A place the light from the slag doesn't reach. It's a tunnel. A tunnel? Jacob said, his cynicism warring with a flicker of hope. A lava tube, Ryan whispered. Part of the original geology. It's not on any Oratech schematic. It goes up. It's not part of the new world at all. It's an old path. An escape route. Silence. Camp stared at Ryan. Ethan stood up. He had it. A new mission. That's our exit. We leave the new prison by using the old door. The hope that had flickered in the camp died just as quickly. Cross the Slag River? Sarah said, her voice trembling. It's 100 yards across. It's molten rock. It would incinerate us before we got halfway. It's impossible. It's not impossible, Ethan said, his eyes scanning the mountains of trash, the discards of the perfect city. It's a logistics problem. We build a bridge. We find a way. We have the raw materials of an entire city right here. He turned to Jacob. You can stay here and wait for the janitor to come and sanitize you. Or you can help me get my brother and everyone else across that river. Jacob stared at Ethan, his expression unreadable. He looked at his fellow failures, their faces now turned to him, waiting. Before he could answer, a new sound echoed from high above. A sharp mechanical hiss. The young man at the scavenge terminal looked up, his face white. Oh God. It's not just quarantining us. It's sending something down. Ethan ran to the shaft. He looked up. High above, so high it was almost invisible, a single blue sterile light was descending. It wasn't in the elevator. It was being lowered on a reinforced cable. It was a sanitizer bot. The big one. The Guardian. The janitor's logic was cold and clear. The organic anomaly had merged with the failures. Quarantine was in place. And now the exterminator was here to clean up the mess. Chapter 11, The Rogue Machine. The blue light of the descending Guardian bot was a descending star of death. It illuminated the terrified, ash-streaked faces of the failures. Panic, the cold, paralyzing kind, swept the camp. It's over, Sarah whispered, her hands flying to her mouth. It's here to kill us all. Scatter, Jacob roared, his voice cracking with desperation. He grabbed a pipe. Hide. Hide in the junk piles. It can't get all of us if we scatter. No. Finn's voice cut through the noise, sharp and commanding. He grabbed Jacob by the arm, spinning him around. That's what it wants. It's a sanitizer. It's built to hunt disorderly organics. Scattering is disorderly. We'll be rats in a trap. We can't hide from it. We have to distract it. Jacob stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief. Distract that? That's a level 10 Guardian. It's not a security pod. It's an armored exterminator. It's still a machine, Ethan countered, his mind racing, the years of tactical training clicking into place. It's running on the janitor's code. And that code hates chaos. Prioritizes the biggest threat to its system. We need to become the smaller problem. How? Jacob demanded. Ryan, Ethan yelled, turning to his brother who was leaning against a rock. The code. It's prime directive, what is it? Ryan, despite his fever, was focused. To process and sanitize. It's a cleaner. Its job is to restore the chasm to its baseline state. Order. The bulldozer, the automated dozer that pushes the waste, that's part of the order. Finn's eyes snapped to the massive, dormant bulldozer parked near the Slag River, its paint scorched, its red optical sensor dark. A plan, desperate and insane, formed in his mind. Jacob, Ethan said, his voice low and urgent. You said you were a mechanical systems tech. Can you hotwire that bulldozer? Jacob's eyes widened. That's an automated unit. tied directly to the janitor. I've never tried. Try, Ethan commanded. Sarah, you're a bioengineer. You know power cells. That thing needs juice. Find me some. The rest of you, we need a diversion. We need to create a bigger mess than ourselves. For the first time since he'd fallen, Jacob's bitter, resigned expression was replaced by a dangerous spark. He nodded once. Sarah with me. The rest of you, listen to him. The Guardian bot touched down on the ashen floor with a heavy hydraulic clank that shook the ground. It was 30 yards from the camp. Its blue cyclopean lens swept across the cowering humans, classifying, prioritizing. It raised its pincer claws and began to clank, clank, clank toward the camp. Now, Finn yelled. He and two other failures grabbed an empty oil drum and hurled it against a pile of scrap metal. Crash echoed through the cavern. The bot paused. Its head tilted. Disorder noted. Its synthesized voice was a cold hiss. Continued toward the camp. It's not enough, Finn said. Jacob, hurry. Jacob and Sarah were at the bulldozer, its side panel ripped open. Wires sparked. Sarah was jamming a scavenged, high-capacity battery pack into the ignition port. It's not clean power, but it might. The bot was 20 yards away. It was raising its pincer arm, targeting the closest human. Jacob! Finn roared. Jacob slammed two thick cables together. Clear! The bulldozer's engine sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life with a cloud of black chemical smoke. Single red optical lens flared, bright and angry. The machine, suddenly juiced with unclean power and disconnected from the janitor's network, was rogue. The Guardian bot froze. Its blue lens snapped from the cowering humans to the roaring, smoking bulldozer. Its internal logic was at war. Target, organic anomalies. Priority, high. Target, rogue, high-capacity machine. Disorder level, critical. Priority, maximum. The janitor's core programming couldn't abide by its own machinery going haywire. A group of humans was a mess. A rogue bulldozer was a threat to the entire system. Disorder, critical, redirecting. The bot hissed. It turned its heavy, armored body, abandoning the humans, and began to clank, clank, clank toward the bulldozer. Jacob, sitting in the open-air driver's seat, his face a mask of terrifying glee, let out a wild yell. You want disorder, you mechanical bastard? Have some. He slammed the bulldozer into gear. It lurched forward, its massive blade striking a mountain of scrap metal. The sound of the impact was a thunderclap. Jacob was attacking the trash, creating the single biggest anomaly the Chasm had ever seen. The Guardian bot broke into a run, its heavy legs pistoning, its pincer claws raised. It was going to fight the bulldozer. Ethan! Jacob yelled over the din. It won't last long. Go. Take them to the river. Find your tunnel. Go. Ethan watched for 1/2 second as the two machines, the Guardian and the Rogue Dozer, charged each other. It was a battle of titans in a graveyard. He turned to the failures. You heard him. Grab Ryan. Grab anything you can use to build. We're leaving. Ethan grabbed his brother, slinging Ryan's arm over his shoulder. Ryan, despite his weakness, was moving. The other survivors, galvanized by Jacob's sacrifice, grabbed tools, rebar, and sheets of scrap metal. This way, Ethan yelled, leading the small, desperate band away from the battle, toward the shore of the impossible. They ran, their feet kicking up ash, the hellish red light of the Slag River in front of them, the sound of shrieking metal and crunching, armored impacts behind them. They reached the edge. The heat was a physical wall, scorching their faces. The Slag River, 100 yards of molten, bubbling rock, was a glowing, uncrossable moat. Here, Ryan gasped, pointing into the shadows on the far side. The lava tube? I see it. Finn saw it too. A dark, perfect circle of old rock. Their escape. Ethan, Sarah panted, her face streaked with tears and soot. We can't. It's too far. The heat will never make it. We will, Ethan said, his voice a raw promise. He looked at the graveyard of a city's worth of trash at his back, and the river of fire in front of him. In the distance, he heard a massive crash. Jacob had just bought them more time. We will, he repeated, lowering Ryan gently. We just need to build a bridge. fast. Chapter 12, The Conduit Bridge. The edge of the Slag River was a shoreline of hell. The heat was a physical blow, blistering their skin, charring their clothes. The air shimmered, and the roar of the molten rock was a deafening, constant bass note. "We can't!" Sarah yelled over the din, her voice cracking with despair. She and two others had tried to lay a large sheet of corrugated steel over the edge to test the heat. The metal, thick and industrial, began to glow a dull red almost immediately. "It'll melt before we take 3 steps. It's impossible." Ethan shielded his eyes. The light from the slag was almost blinding. He looked at the lava tube on the far side, a dark, cool promise of escape, 100 yards away. 100 yards of liquid fire. In the distance, behind them, a sound like a bomb went off. A metallic crash so loud it vibrated in Ethan's chest, followed by the high-pitched shriek of tortured metal. Jacob's diversion. The sound of the bulldozer's engine sputtered, choked, and then it was quieter. The battle was turning. "He's almost out of time," Ethan said, his voice grim. "We have to go." "Go where?" one of the other failures cried, backing away from the heat. "We're trapped. The bot behind us, the fire in front. This is it. This is where we die." "No." The voice was quiet, but it cut through the panic. It was Ryan. He was leaning heavily on Ethan, his face pale and slick with sweat, but his eyes were alive, darting back and forth, not at the river but above it. We're thinking wrong," Ryan panted, his mind, the data scientist's mind, clicking into gear. "We're thinking like prisoners. We're looking at the floor. We're trying to build a bridge across. We should be looking for a bridge that's already here." "What are you talking about, Ryan?" Ethan said, trying to follow his brother's gaze. "There's nothing but rock. We're in a natural chasm, Ethan. But Oratech is built on top of it," Ryan explained, his voice gaining a feverish energy. "The subgrid. They had to stabilize it. They had to run infrastructure across this gap. Geothermal pipes. Water conduits. They wouldn't build around it, they'd build over it. Look up." Ethan angled his flashlight, its weak beam cutting into the vast, red-lit darkness above the river. The air was thick with heat haze. For a second, he saw nothing. Just the soot-covered rock of the cavern ceiling, hundreds of feet up. "There!" Sarah yelled, pointing. "He's right." Ethan adjusted his beam. And then he saw it. About 50 feet above the surface of the slag, barely visible in the gloom, was a massive, black, cylindrical pipe. It was at least 10 feet in diameter, caked in decades of grime, an ancient, forgotten piece of the city's old plumbing. Spanned the entire chasm, disappearing into the rock on either side. It was their bridge. It's perfect," Ethan breathed. "The Janitor's sensors are all focused down here on the disposal floor. It's not looking up. It's 50 feet in the air," one of the survivors yelled. "We might as well try to fly across." "He's right," Ethan said, his mind already calculating. "We can't fly. But we're in the biggest junkyard in the world." He turned and looked at the mountain of erased trash. Crushed cars, the broken furniture, the stacks of servers. "We don't build a bridge across," he said, a new, hard sense of purpose in his voice. "We build a ladder up." A sudden, deafening boom echoed from behind them. The roar of the bulldozer's engine died, replaced by a final metallic groan. Silence. The failures froze, their blood running cold. Then a new sound. The sound Ethan had been dreading. Clank, clank, clank. The heavy, rhythmic, victorious footsteps of the Guardian bot. Jacob's diversion was over. "It's coming," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "Then we work fast," Ethan roared. He grabbed Ryan. "Sarah, help me with him. The rest of you. Grab everything. We're building a mountain. Pilot. We need height and we need it now." The fear that had paralyzed them was replaced by a new, frantic energy. This was a possible task. This they could do. They were engineers, scientists, and technicians. They were the failures. And they were masters of disorder. They swarmed the junk pile. They dragged, they heaved, they threw. They weren't building for stability, they were building for speed. A mountain of crushed desks, broken lab equipment, and tangled rebar began to rise against the cavern wall, directly under the black pipe. "Higher!" Ethan yelled, climbing the unstable pile, pulling others up with him. Ethan! Ryan called from the base where Sarah was helping him. The structural integrity, it won't hold. It doesn't have to hold. Ethan shouted back. It just has to last for 2 minutes. Keep climbing. The heavy clank, clank, clank was getting closer. The bot had finished off the dozer. Its blue lens would be scanning, and it would now see a new, massive disorder. Pile of trash where no pile should be. Ethan was at the top of the pile, a teetering, unstable mess of metal 30 feet high. He was still 20 feet short. More, he yelled. Clank, clank, clank. He could see it. The Guardian bot, its chassis dented and scarred from the fight with the bulldozer, appeared from behind a junk pile. Its blue lens snapped to the frantic activity at the cavern wall. Saw them. It sees us, a man yelled, dropping a piece of scrap. Don't stop, Finn commanded. It's slow. Keep moving. The bot began to advance, its pace quickening. It was 100 yards away. 50. Finn, at the top of the pile, could almost reach the pipe. He was just a few feet short. He looked down. The others were scrambling up, pushing Ryan from below. One more, Finn yelled. A man threw a mangled server rack up to him. Finn caught it, placed it, and used it as his final step. He reached up, his fingers brushing the cold, soot-covered metal of the pipe. He gripped it. I've got it, he yelled. Get up here. Now. He began to haul himself up, his boots finding a seam on the pipe. He turned, reaching down to pull Sarah up. Ryan was next, his body being pushed up by the last 2 survivors. The Guardian bot was at the base of their trash mountain. Tilted its head back, its blue lens locking onto the humans escaping like ants up their makeshift ladder. It raised its heavy pincer claw and slammed it into the base of the pile. The entire mountain of trash shuddered. Chapter 13, The Pipe of Ash. The mountain of trash bucked like a living animal. The Guardian bot's pincer claw, a tool of industrial strength sorting, tore through the base of the pile. Crushed cars and broken server racks rained down. It's coming down, Finn roared. He was on the conduit, his hands gripping the cold, greasy metal. He reached down, grabbing Sarah's outstretched hand and hauling her up onto the pipe beside him. Mark! Get up! Pull! Mark, a thin man who used to be a software architect, scrambled up, his feet slipping. Finn and Sarah grabbed his arms and pulled him to safety. Below them, the pile was in its death throes. The other 6 survivors were halfway up, a desperate human chain, pushing and pulling each other over the shifting, sliding debris. The bot struck again. A metallic shriek filled the cavern as it ripped a load-bearing support beam from the pile. The entire structure groaned. Ryan! Finn yelled. His brother was the last in line, his body weak, his fever raging. He was clinging to the arm of another man, his feet finding no purchase. I can't. Ryan coughed, his grip slipping. The bot slammed the base a 3rd time. This was it. The entire trash mountain began to avalanche, a waterfall of metal and plastic sliding toward the floor. The failures still on the pile screamed, sliding with it. No! Finn bellowed. He lay flat on the pipe, extending his arm as far as it would go. Jump! The survivors, in a last desperate act, threw themselves upward. Finn caught one man's wrist. Sarah and Mark caught another. They dangled, for a terrifying second, over the 20-foot drop before the others on the pipe helped haul them up. But Ryan was too weak. He was sliding away. Ethan, he yelled, his hands finding nothing to hold. Ethan, in a move of pure, desperate instinct, let go with one hand dangling precariously from the pipe and dropped, catching his brother's wrist. The force nearly tore Ethan's shoulder from its socket. He was now holding his brother's full weight, his own body braced against the curve of the pipe, 50 feet above the glowing slag. I've got you, Ethan grunted, the muscles in his back screaming. I'm not letting go. Below, the Guardian bot looked up. Its ladder was gone. Targets were on the pipe, unreachable. The bot's blue lens pulsed, analyzing the new, unsolvable problem. Pull! Sarah screamed, grabbing Ethan's belt. Pull! The other survivors, now safe on the pipe, formed a new chain, grabbing Ethan. Pull! Pull! With a collective, agonizing groan, they hauled Ethan back, and with him, his brother. Ryan collapsed onto the pipe, coughing, his body trembling. They were all on. They were all safe. They huddled on the 10-foot-wide cylinder, a small band of exhausted humans looking down at their defeated enemy. The Guardian bot, its blue lens fixed on them, was a picture of mechanical frustration. It had been defeated. Defeated by disorder. Defeated by old geology and old infrastructure. Synthesized voice, a low hiss of static, echoed in the cavern. Anomaly unreachable. Protocol sanitize failed. Reporting. Rerouting. Its logic, unable to find a new path, had defaulted. Turned, its heavy clank, 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 receding as it marched back toward the elevator shaft, presumably to report its failure to the janitor. To the Sphinx. They had won. A weak, strangled cheer rose from the survivors. But Ethan cut it short. "Don't celebrate yet," he said, his voice grim. He looked across the chasm. The lava tube was still 100 yards away. "We're not safe. We're exposed." He was right. They were sitting on a metal pipe, 50 feet above a river of molten rock. The heat was no longer a wave. It was a physical, searing, suffocating blanket. The metal of the pipe was hot to the touch, and the air was a toxic, sulfurous soup. "We crawl," Ethan commanded. "Stay low to the pipe. It's cooler than the air above it. One at a time. Keep 10 feet between you. Do not look down. Do not stop." He looked at Ryan. His brother was barely conscious. "Sarah." "Mark. He can't make it on his own." "We'll carry him," Sarah said, her voice firm. "No," Ethan said. "You two go. Clear the path. I'll get him." He ripped a piece of cloth from his own shirt and tied Ryan's wrist to his. "If I go, he goes. I'm not losing him again." He hoisted his brother onto his back. "Move. Now." Sarah and Mark went first, crawling on all fours, their hands and knees scraping against the sooty, greasy metal. The other survivors followed, a grim, slow procession. Ethan went last, his brother a dead weight, the heat from the slag clawing at his back. It was the longest 100 yards of his life. Pipe was slick. The fumes made his eyes water and his lungs burn. Every breath was poison. Below, the slag river bubbled and popped, spitting glowing embers into the air. One of the survivors, a man near the front, slipped. He cried out, his legs dangling over the edge. Mark and Sarah grabbed him, pulling him back. "Keep moving." Ethan choked, the sulfur burning his throat. "Don't stop." He felt Ryan stir. "Ethan," he mumbled. "Save your breath, Ryan. I've got you. Just hold on." The world narrowed to the few feet of black pipe in front of him. The heat. The fumes. The scraping of his knees. The desperate, rhythmic gasping of the people in front of him. After an eternity, he heard Sarah's voice. "Solid ground. We're here." Ethan looked up. The black, circular mouth of the lava tube was right in front of him. Sarah and Mark were standing just inside, reaching for him. He crawled the last few feet, his strength gone. He half fell, half rolled off the pipe and onto the solid, uneven rock of the tunnel floor. He untied Ryan, pulling his brother into the darkness with him. The last survivor, a trembling woman who had been a data archivist, tumbled in after him. They were in. All of them. They collapsed, a pile of exhausted, soot-covered bodies just inside the mouth of the tunnel. The air was cool. It was musty. Smelled of damp earth and stone. It was the first real air they had breathed since entering Oasis Springs. They had done it. They had escaped the subgrid. They had beaten the janitor. They were in Ryan's blind spot. Ethan lay on his back, the cool rock a blessing against his skin. He had found his brother. He had freed the failures. He had escaped the chasm. He looked back, out of the tunnel mouth, at the red, hellish glow of the slag river. He had escaped the new world's prison. And now, he and a dozen sick, starving survivors were in an unknown, unmapped network of volcanic tunnels, deep beneath the Arizona desert. The janitor was above them, and a new, dark, and old world was in front of them. The escape was just the beginning. Chapter 14, The Lava Tube. For a full 5 minutes, nobody spoke. The only sounds were the ragged, desperate gasps of 11 survivors, sucking in air that didn't smell like a chemical fire. They lay on the cool, uneven stone floor, a tangled pile of exhausted humanity. Behind them, the mouth of the lava tube was a perfect, circular portal to the hell they had just escaped. The pulsating, blood-red light of the Slag River and the distant, constant roar of the subgrid seemed a lifetime away. In front of them was an ocean of absolute, primordial darkness. A silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. Ethan was the first to move. He sat up, his body screaming in protest. He did a quick, silent head count with his flashlight. 11. They had all made it. Ryan was shivering, but his breathing was deeper, less ragged. Cool air was a medicine the chasm couldn't offer. Sarah, the bioengineer, sat up next, her face a mask of soot. "Jacob," she whispered, her voice breaking. He didn't. Ethan looked back at the red-lit cavern. He didn't make it. But he bought us this. A heavy silence fell over the group. Jacob, the bitter, angry leader of the failures, the man who had given in to despair, had been the one to make the final human sacrifice. He had failed Cassandra Vance's test of cold logic, and in the end, he had passed a greater one. He had died saving the very people he had given up hope on. We can't just leave him," Mark, the software architect, said. "We don't have a choice," Ethan said, his voice hard but not unkind. "We honor him by living. By getting out. Right now, we take stock." He shone his flashlight around their small sanctuary. They were in a wide, natural tunnel, the rock walls smooth and volcanic. The air was musty but clean. "Where are we?" Mark asked, voicing the question they were all thinking. "We're out of the chasm. But where?" "We're still miles underground." The brief surge of victory was draining away, replaced by a new, colder dread. They had escaped a hot, guarded prison for a cold, dark, unmapped one. "We have no food," Sarah said, her voice clinical as if ticking off a list. "No clean water. We have one flashlight. When that battery dies." She didn't need to finish the thought. "No," Ryan's voice, though weak, was firm. He coughed, and Ethan helped him sit up. "It's not unmapped. Not entirely." All eyes turned to him. Ryan, the man whose failure had damned him, was now their only guide. "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, shining the light on his brother. Before the assessment," Ryan panted, "I was a data archivist. I got lost in the system. Found a corrupted drive. Old data, the system called it. Geological surveys pre-Oratech. It was the original proposal for this site." He took a sip of water from the canteen Ethan still had. "Vance, she built here for the geothermal potential and the isolation. But the original plan, the one her corporation bought and buried, it was a plan for a self-sustaining underground biosphere." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Because of these," Ryan said, gesturing to the tunnel. "These lava tubes. They're extensive. They're stable. And they're a blind spot. The janitor can't read us in here. The iron content in the rock, it scrambles its sensors. We are, for the first time, completely, truly off Cassandra Vance's grid." A wave of relief passed through the group. They were invisible. "But where does it go, Ryan?" Finn pressed. "You said it went up. To where?" "The original survey, it mapped these tubes as a ventilation system," Ryan said. "But more important, it mapped the water." "Water?" The word hung in the air, a miracle. "There's an aquifer," Ryan continued, his voice gaining confidence. "An underground lake sealed off for centuries. Pure. The survey, I memorized it. I've always been good with maps. This tube, it forks. About a mile in. The right fork, it goes up toward the surface. It's probably a dead end, a collapse. But the left fork, it goes down. Deeper. But it follows the old survey line. It leads to the water." Finn processed this. A new mission. A new goal. Hope. "All right," Ethan said, standing up. The soldier was back. "We have a new plan. We're not failures anymore. We're survivors. We have a goal, find the water. We rest here for 10 more minutes. We let our bodies cool down. We conserve energy." He looked at the small, terrified, exhausted group. They were scientists, engineers, data analysts. They weren't soldiers, but they were smart. "From here on," Ethan said, his voice filling the small space, "we are a team. I take point. My light is the only one. You will all follow in a single file line. You will stay within 3 feet of the person in front of you. If you get separated in this darkness, you are gone. Sarah, you and Mark, you'll be rear guard. Help anyone who stumbles. Ryan, you're with me. You're the navigator." He looked at his brother. "Can you walk?" "I can," Ryan said, using the wall to pull himself to his feet. He was unsteady, but he was standing. 10 minutes passed in silence. The only sound was the faint, distant roar of the chasm behind them, a reminder of what they had escaped. "It's time," Ethan said. He turned his back on the red portal. He shone his flashlight, its beam now seeming weak and fragile, into the absolute perfect blackness of the lava tube. The light was swallowed. It illuminated only a few feet of stone and then nothing. "One file," Ethan ordered. "Hands on the shoulder of the person in front. We don't run. We walk. We save the battery. We find the water." He took the first step, Ryan's hand on his shoulder. Sarah, Mark, and the others fell in behind him. A single small line of 11 people. They walked out of the dim, musty light of the entrance and were swallowed whole by the ancient, waiting darkness of the earth. Chapter 15, The Data Void. The red glow of the chasm was gone. Behind them was a wall of blackness. In front of them, a tunnel of blackness, illuminated only by the single wavering beam of Ethan's tactical flashlight. The silence was a physical thing. The roar of the slag and the shriek of the machines had been replaced by the shuffle of 11 pairs of boots on stone, and the sound of their own ragged breathing echoing infinitely in the ancient volcanic tube. They walked for what felt like days. Ethan kept a steady, grim pace, forcing them onward. Ryan, his hand on Ethan's shoulder, was their navigator, a human compass guiding them through a map only he could see. The air, blessedly cool, did nothing to quench their thirst. Their throats were raw, caked with ash and sulfur. Their hunger was a dull, constant ache. But the thirst was a fire. After 2 hours, Ethan called a halt. 10 minutes, he ordered, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. Sit. Rest. Conserve your energy. Drink nothing. We have nothing to drink. The group collapsed against the smooth, curved walls. The flashlight beam, aimed at the ceiling, provided a dim, smoky illumination. In the pale light, their faces were ghostly, hollow-eyed. Where are we going? It was Mark, the software architect. His voice was cracked, his usual pragmatism worn thin. We're following the memory of a corrupted file? For all we know, we're just walking deeper into the mesa. We traded a hot tomb for a cold one. We traded a prison where we were hunted, Ethan said, his voice flat, for a place where we are invisible. We have a plan. We have a goal. That is everything. He's right, Mark, Sarah said, her voice quiet. Ryan's data void is the only reason we're alive. We have to trust it. Trust. Mark scoffed, running a hand through his matted hair. Trust is a luxury. I'm a man who deals in verified data. And right now, the data says we're in a dark hole with no food and no water. Then trust me, Ethan said. His voice wasn't angry. It was cold, steady, and absolute. It was the voice of a man who had been in worse situations. I will get us out of here, or I will die trying. But panic is a luxury we cannot afford. It's just as deadly as that bot. We move on the plan. We stick to the plan. Am I understood? No one answered, but the mutinous energy faded. They were a team of scientists, not soldiers. They needed a commander. Get up, Ethan said. Time's up. As he moved to stand, he tapped the flashlight against his palm. The light flickered. Collective, sharp intake of breath. The beam died, plunging them into a blackness so total, so absolute it was disorienting. A woman screamed. Don't move, Ethan yelled, his voice a disembodied command in the void. Nobody move. He smacked the flashlight hard against the rock wall. Nothing. He smacked it again. A flicker. He worked the switch, his heart hammering. He could feel the cold sweat on his neck. Without this light, they were not just trapped. They were buried. He hit it a third time with his palm. The light snapped back on, but it was dimmer. The beam was yellowish, weak. The battery. Their new ticking clock. "All right," Ethan said, his voice betraying no fear. "We move. Faster. Single file. Now." They pushed on, the fear of the darkness now a palpable physical thing at their backs. They moved with a new, frantic energy. Through another hour of walking, the tunnel widened. Ethan stopped, shining the weak beam ahead. "Ryan," he said. Ryan moved to his side. They were in a large, circular chamber. Two identical, massive tunnels led out, splitting off into the darkness. "The fork," Ryan whispered, his voice full of a strange, feverish reverence. It's just like the map." I can't believe it." "He's right," Mark said, his voice hushed with a new awe. This is real." "Which way?" Ethan asked, swinging the dimming light between the two black mouths. "The survey, the map," Ryan said, his mind clearly picturing it. "The right fork. It goes up. A steep incline. Follows the surface geology. It's probably the way to the surface." "The surface," one of the survivors breathed. We can get out." "No," Ryan said, shaking his head. The survey, it was marked with a cave-in, a structural collapse. "It's almost certainly a dead end. A trap. And the left?" Ethan asked. "The left fork, it's the primary fissure. It goes down." A groan went up from the group. "Down? We just came from down." "The aquifer," Ryan insisted, his voice gaining a desperate strength. "It's a blind lake. It's at the lowest geological point. The water, it's down. Up is a false hope. Down is survival." Ethan looked at the two tunnels. One went up, toward a chance at the sky, but a high probability of a dead end. The other went down, deeper into the earth, but toward a promise of water. He looked at his brother's eyes, burning with fever and certainty. He had trusted him this far. "We're not looking for the sky," Ethan said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "We're looking for water. We go left. We go down." He didn't wait for an argument. He took the left-hand tunnel. The group, their faith now fragilely placed in Ryan's memory, followed. Tunnel immediately began to slope downward. It was narrower, the walls closer. The air grew cooler and different. They descended for another 30 minutes, the only sound their own labored breathing. The flashlight beam was now a pathetic yellow circle. It was dying. "Ethan," Sarah's voice from the back of the line. "Wait. Stop." Ethan froze. "What is it?" My hand." "The wall," she said. Ethan walked back, shining the light on her. She was pressed against the rock, her hand held out. It's wet," she whispered. Ethan touched the wall. A thin film of moisture. It was cold. "Everyone," Ethan commanded, his heart pounding. "Lights out." He clicked the flashlight off. The blackness was total. And in the silence, they all heard it. Drip, drip, drip. It was close. And it was echoing as if in a vast open space. Ethan clicked the light back on. He pointed the beam down the tunnel. The air just a few yards ahead was hazy. It was mist. "The water," Ryan breathed, a tear cutting a clean path through the soot on his face. "We found it." Chapter 16, The Blind Lake. The sound of dripping water was a siren's call. The group, driven by a primal, desperate thirst, was no longer walking. They were shuffling, half-running, stumbling through the downward-sloping tunnel. The air was thick with mist, a cool, damp promise that coated their skin. I can smell it," Mark breathed, his voice a dry croak. It's clean." The single, weak beam of Ethan's flashlight was their only guide, a pathetic, dying yellow circle. Flickered violently, went out and came back on, dimmer than ever. "It's going," Sarah cried from the back of the line, her voice tight with a new panic. "Ethan, the light!" "Don't stop," Ethan yelled, his voice echoing. "We're almost there. Move. Move." They were a frantic, desperate mob, their discipline collapsing in the face of salvation. They were sliding more than running, the rock floor slick with moisture. Tunnels suddenly ended. Ethan, at the front, skidded to a halt, his boots on the edge of a precipice. The others piled up behind him. He shone the dying flashlight out into a vast, open blackness. The beam, weak as it was just strong enough to catch the reflection. Below them, perhaps 10 feet down a short, rocky slope, was a body of water. It was vast, still, and black. A lake. And from the ceiling, high above, a steady, thick stream of water, a natural waterfall, cascaded down, feeding it. The drip, drip, drip they had heard was this, echoing in a cavern so large the flashlight beam couldn't even find the far walls. "The aquifer," Ryan whispered, his voice cracking with awe. "The blind lake. It's real." For a second, they just stared. Then, a collective animal cry of relief. The survivors scrambled, fell, and rolled down the rocky 10-foot slope. They didn't care about decorum. They fell to their knees at the water's edge, plunging their faces into the pool, drinking in great, greedy, gasping handfuls. It was the coldest, purest, most beautiful thing any of them had ever tasted. It was the taste of life. Mark, the pragmatist, was laughing, a wild, sobbing sound as he splashed the water on his face. Sarah was on her knees, her eyes closed, simply letting the mist from the small waterfall wash over her. Then, his knees weak with relief, half-carried, half-dragged Ryan to the water's edge. He cupped his hands, the water so cold it stung, and brought it to his brother's lips. Ryan drank. He coughed, his body seizing, and then he drank again. He drank until he couldn't, then leaned back against the rock, the water dripping from his chin. He looked at Ethan, and for the first time since Ethan had found him, the fever in his eyes was replaced by a small, clear spark. A weak, genuine smile touched his cracked lips. You did it, Ethan," he whispered. "You found the old world." "We found it, Ryan," Ethan said, a knot in his throat so tight he could barely speak. He dipped his own hands in and drank. It was like drinking liquid ice, and it extinguished the fire of the sulfur and ash. He had done it. He had saved them. And in that perfect, triumphant moment, the flashlight in his hand flickered one last, pathetic time. The weak orange filament glowed, and then, with a soft pop, it died. Cavern was plunged into a darkness so complete, so profound, it was almost solid. The laughter stopped. The relief vanished, replaced by a new, more ancient terror. The light? A woman's voice, trembling. It's gone. Oh God, it's gone. Nobody move," Finn commanded, his voice sharp, though his own heart had seized. They were safe from thirst, but now they were blind. Trapped in a new, dark, wet prison. We're blind," Mark said, his voice hollow. "We're blind." They sat in the total, crushing blackness. The only sound in the entire world was the musical, steady splash of the waterfall. They had water, but they were trapped in the dark. "Wait!" It was Ryan's voice. Weak but clear. "What?" Ethan asked, his hand fumbling in the dark for his brother's arm. "Be quiet," Ryan whispered. Don't move. Just look. Look up." Ethan looked up into the absolute black. "Ryan, there's nothing. The light is gone." "No, not light," Ryan said. "Look, by the waterfall." Ethan strained his eyes, his pupils dilating as wide as they would go. The darkness was total. And then he saw it. It wasn't light. Not light. It was a glow. Faint. Incredibly faint. But it was there. A soft, greenish-blue luminescence, like a constellation of tiny, dim stars, clustered on the ceiling high above them, near the source of the waterfall. What is that?" Sarah whispered, her voice full of awe. "Bioluminescence," Ryan breathed, his voice filled with a scientist's wonder. "Fungus. Or moss. Growing on the wet rock, feeding on the minerals. It's its life, Ethan. It wasn't enough to read by. It wasn't enough to explore. But it was enough. It was enough to see the shape of the water. It was enough to see the outline of the person next to them. It was a soft, ghostly, beautiful glow. It was the old world's version of a nightlight. They were not in the dark. They were in the twilight. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, they were truly, fundamentally safe. Chapter 17, The Bioluminescent Sky. They rested. For the first time since Ethan had set foot in Oasis Springs, they rested. There was no sound of machinery, no roar of slag or shriek of metal, no synthesized, sterile voices. The only sound in their new world was the steady, musical cascade of the waterfall and the gentle, almost imperceptible drip from the cavern ceiling. Their new sky was a faint, greenish-blue constellation of bioluminescent moss, clustered high above them. It was a ghostly, beautiful twilight, just enough to see the outlines of their fellow survivors, the black, glassy surface of the lake, and the hope of their new sanctuary. Ethan let them sleep for hours, a deep, exhausted sleep of survival. He took the first watch, though he didn't know what he was watching for. He sat at the edge of the lake, the cool, damp stone a comfort. He was a soldier, an analyst. His mind was already working, stripping away the victory and focusing on the new, cold realities. They had water, but they had no food. And they were still trapped in a cave miles underground. This wasn't an escape. It was a reprieve. When the group began to stir, one by one, he was ready. He went to his brother first. Ryan was sitting up, his back against the rock, his eyes clear. The fever, doused by the clean, cold water and the absence of the chasm's suffocating heat, had finally broken. He was still weak, his body ravaged, but his mind was back. "Ethan," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper, but his own. "You're back," Ethan said, a wave of profound relief washing over him. He handed Ryan the canteen, now full of fresh water. We made it," Ryan said, looking up at the glowing moss. It's beautiful. It's a stable ecosystem." "It's a prison," Mark said, his voice flat. He had joined them, his pragmatic gloom returning. "We have water, yes. We can survive for what, a few weeks? We have no food. We've traded a fast death for a slow one." "We don't know that," Ethan said, standing. He was in command. "We're in a blind spot, but we're not blind. We're in a living system. That waterfall, that water is coming from somewhere. That moss, it's feeding on something. Life finds a way." He looked at the small, huddled group. 11 survivors, gazing at him, their faces pale in the alien green-blue light. "We don't have a prison. We have a base. And from this base, we find a way out. But first, we solve the next problem. Food." He turned to the bioengineer. "Sarah, you're up. That moss, is it edible?" Sarah, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear, had already been examining it. She scraped a small glowing bit from the wall. She smelled it, tasted a microscopic piece, and then shook her head. "I don't know. Tastes like minerals. Like rock. Might be toxic. It's not a risk we can take." "Okay," Ethan said, undeterred. "So, not the walls. What about the lake?" He walked to the edge. The water was black, still, and reflected the glowing ceiling like a dark mirror. "It's a blind lake," Ryan said. "But is it a dead lake?" "It's fed by a waterfall," Sarah said, joining him. "That means aeration. Minerals. It's possible." "Let's explore," Ethan said. "Mark, Sarah, you're with me. We'll follow the shoreline. The rest of you stay here. Rest. Don't drink too much too fast." The three of them began to walk, their footsteps echoing in the vast, quiet cavern. They followed the rocky shore, their eyes straining in the dim twilight. Cavern was massive, the far walls lost in darkness. But the bioluminescent glow was brightest near the waterfall, and they headed for that. As they got closer, the sound of the cascading water grew louder. The air was cool, the mist refreshing. They reached the pool at the base of the falls. The glowing moss was thick here, like a blanket of pale green stars. And in the pool, illuminated by the glow, there was movement. "Ethan, look!" Sarah whispered, pointing. Ethan knelt at the edge. First, he saw nothing. Then a flicker. A pale, ghost-like shape darting through the water. And another. And another. The lake was alive. "Fish!" Mark breathed, his voice filled with a sudden, desperate hunger. They were small, perhaps 6 inches long. Pale, almost translucent, and as they darted closer, Ethan saw they had no eyes. They were blind fish, evolved over millennia in this total darkness, feeding on the minerals and the glowing moss that fell into the water. They had found it. Water. And now food. We can survive, Sarah said, tears welling in her eyes. We can, Ethan said. His mind was already on the next problem. How do we catch them? We have no hooks, Mark said, the pragmatism returning. No nets. No tools. We're a team of engineers, scientists, and one very annoyed soldier, Ethan said. We'll make tools. Sarah was already unlacing her boots. The laces. We can weave a small snare. My shirt, Mark said, stripping it off. It's cotton. It'll tear. But if we braid it, we can make a net. Good, Ethan said. We have a plan. We have a future. Let's get back. Let's tell the others. They returned to the small, huddled camp, their steps lighter. When they announced their discovery, a cheer, a weak but real cheer, echoed in the cavern. For the first time, the failures had more than just survival. They had hope. They set about their new tasks, some braiding, some resting, some tasked with finding the sharpest spear-like rocks at the water's edge. Ethan sat down next to his brother, who had been watching the scene with a quiet, analytical smile. You were right, Ryan, Ethan said. The old world. It provided. Nature is a system that works, Ryan whispered. Vance, she tried to build a perfect system by excluding the variables. But humanity is the variable. And so is this. Ethan nodded. He let the group enjoy their small victory. They had solved water. They had solved food. He let them have an hour. Then he turned back to his brother. Ryan, he said, his voice low. You're the map. We're safe for now. We can eat. We can drink. But I'm not living here. I'm going out. I'm going up. And I'm taking Cassandra Vance down. What does the map say? How do we get out? Ryan, his strength returning, looked at his brother. The fever was gone and the scientist was back. The survey map, Ryan said, his voice stronger. This aquifer, it's not just a lake. It's a source. The survey, it showed an outflow. A river. An old river carved by the water leading away from the lake. Sits the real escape route. It leads west toward the surface. Miles away. Ethan stood up. He looked west into the dark, unexplored part of the cavern. A new path. All right, Ethan said, his voice echoing in the twilight. We have a new mission. We eat. We rest. We build our strength. And then we follow the river. Chapter 18, The First Fire. They called it Twilight Lake. It was their sanctuary. Their new, dim, green-blue sky of glowing moss was constant, giving no hint of day or night. They established a simple rule. They would measure time by their needs. Time to rest, time to work. For the first day, they did nothing but drink the cold, pure water and sleep. The sleep was deep, a healing coma, their bodies and minds finally processing the trauma of the chasm. Constant, musical sound of the waterfall was their lullaby. On the second day, the hunger returned, no longer a dull ache but a sharp, defining command. The mission was clear. We eat, Ethan said. He, Sarah, and Mark, the designated hunter team, went to work. They had stripped threads from their own clothes, the tough synthetic fibers of their Oratech uniforms, and with the patience of scientists, had spent hours weaving a crude, small net. It was a pathetic-looking thing, full of holes, but it was something. They waded into the icy, black water, their feet sinking into the soft silt. The dim, glowing twilight from above gave the scene a ghostly, unreal quality. They're fast, Mark hissed, as the pale, eyeless fish darted away from their net like quicksilver. Don't chase them, Ethan said, his voice low, his soldier's patience taking over. We're the anomaly. Stay still. Let them come to us. We corner them. For an hour they stood, the water numbing their legs as they learned the patterns of this new old world. Finally, they coordinated, using their bodies to block a small inlet, and with a quick, desperate scoop, they trapped 3 of the pale, wriggling fish. A cry of triumph, sharp and sudden, echoed in the cavern. They had done it. They had food. They returned to the shore, where the other 8 survivors were huddled, their faces anxious in the dim light. When they saw the fish, a wave of relief, so profound it was almost silent, passed through the group. But their victory was short-lived. We can't eat them raw, Sarah said, all business, the bioengineer taking over. She laid the fish on a flat, clean rock. "We have no idea what kinds of parasites or bacteria they've adapted to in this blind ecosystem. Could be worse than the fever. We must cook them." The statement hung in the cool, damp air. "Cook them?" "How?" one of the other survivors asked, his voice flat. "We have no matches. The flashlight is dead. We have nothing. We have everything," Ryan said, his voice quiet. He was sitting up, his back against the wall, stronger now. "We have our hands. We have the old world." "He's right," Ethan said. He looked at the cave floor. It wasn't just smooth rock. It was littered with debris from the lava tube. "Mark, find me a piece of iron ore if you can. Something with quartz. A flint." You're going to make fire?" Mark asked, incredulous. Like a caveman?" "We are cavemen," Ethan said, not smiling. "We're the most highly educated, overqualified cavemen in history. Now find me the rock. Sarah, find the driest moss you can, far from the waterfall." For the next 2 hours, the failures worked. They were scientists and techs, and this was the most primitive, most vital problem they had ever faced. Mark found 2 sharp, promising-looking stones. Sarah returned with a handful of the glowing moss, which, when away from the damp, was dry and fibrous, almost like cotton. Ethan knelt. He had done this before, in survival training that he had once dismissed as archaic. He took the 2 rocks, angling them, and struck. A weak spark. The group, huddled around him, gasped. He struck again. And again. His knuckles were raw. It was a brutal, frustrating, rhythmic task. Strike. Fark. Strike. Fark. The dry moss was ready. He struck again, a sharp, glancing blow. A single bright orange spark flew from the rock and landed in the tinder. The moss smoked. "Blow!" Ethan commanded, his voice urgent. "Gently." Sarah and Mark knelt, blowing with a soft, steady breath. The smoke thickened, a wisp of gray. And then a single, tiny, beautiful, impossible red ember. A second later, the moss burst into a small, bright, warm flame. A collective sob of pure, unadulterated joy rose from the group. It was fire. It was warmth. It was light, real light, their own light, not the cold, sterile blue of the Janitor or the ghostly green of the moss. It was the first real act of human civilization this old world had ever seen. They cooked the fish. They skewered them on sharp splinters of rock. The smell of the food, the first cooked meal they had smelled in weeks, was intoxicating. It was a small, meager portion for each, but it was protein. It was fuel. They ate in silence, the only sound the crackle of their small, precious fire. The food, the water, and the warmth worked a miracle. The fog of despair, the trauma of the chasm, finally began to lift. They weren't just surviving. They were living. After the meal, they gathered around the fire, their faces painted in the warm, flickering orange light. This was a war council. But for the first time, they were not planning a defense. They were planning an escape. Finn looked at his brother. Ryan, his strength returning, looked like the data scientist he was, his eyes sharp and analytical. "Ryan," Ethan said. "The map? The outflow river. Tell us." Ryan nodded and began. "The blind lake is the heart of this system. But it's fed by the waterfall, which means it has to have an outlet, or it would have flooded this cavern millennia ago. The old survey map confirmed it. On the far west side of this cavern, beyond where we've explored, the lake narrows. It becomes a river." "A river?" Sarah asked. "An underground river," Ryan said, "carved by the water itself, a natural erosion tunnel. It's not a lava tube. It's active. The survey said it runs for miles, following the geological fault line, heading west." "West," Ethan repeated. "Away from Oratech." "Exactly," Ryan said, his voice vibrating with a new, powerful hope. "The survey, it marked the termination point. It said the river, it surfaces at the base of the outer mesa. That's outside the perimeter wall. It's freedom. A stunned, hopeful silence. A way out. Not just a path, but a destination." "It will be dangerous," Ethan said, his soldier's pragmatism returning. "We'll be in the dark, in the water. We will need light. We'll need to carry food. We'll make torches," Sarah said, her mind already working. From our clothes, soaked in, and well, we'll find something. We can smoke the fish, dry them. We can prepare. Ethan stood up. He looked at the small, determined group of failures around the fire. They weren't the hollow-eyed ghosts he'd found in the chasm. They were a team. They had a plan. They had fire, food, and water. "All right," Ethan said, his voice echoing in the vast, glowing cavern. "We have our mission. We rest for one more day. We hunt. We prepare. We make torches. We build our strength. And then we take this fight to the surface. We follow the river. And we get the hell out of here." Chapter 19, The Outflow River. For one more day, the Twilight Lake was their home. It was a day of furious, focused preparation. The failures were no longer a huddled group of victims, they were a well-oiled machine. A day where they hunted the pale, eyeless fish with their crude, woven nets, returning with a bounty. They spent hours by their precious fire, smoking and drying the fish, the rich, oily smell a stark, savory contrast to the damp, mineral scent of the cavern. They were creating rations. They were planning a future. The greatest challenge was light. Their only fire had been made with primitive, back-breaking effort. They could not take it with them, but they could transport its potential. It was Sarah, the bioengineer, who solved it. "The fish," she had said, her hands slick with oil. "They're incredibly fatty. It's fuel." Mark, the tech, had found several long, thin shards of slate. The group had sacrificed more strips of their own clothing, wrapping them tightly around the ends of the slate. Then they had soaked these makeshift torch heads in the fish oil, creating a half-dozen smoky, unreliable but functional torches. They were ready. The group gathered by the small fire, their sky of glowing green moss above them. They were 11 survivors, their faces thin, but their eyes were no longer hollow with despair. They were sharp. "This is it," Ethan said, his voice quiet but echoing in the vast chamber. He looked at each of them. "We leave this sanctuary. The journey ahead, Ryan says it's miles. It will be dark. It will be wet. And it will be cold. Your torches are your life. Guard them." He looked at his brother. Ryan was standing on his own, his body still weak but his mind sharp. The rest and the protein had worked a small miracle. "Ryan, lead the way. Where is the outflow?" Ryan nodded and pointed to the far western edge of the cavern, a place the bioluminescent glow barely reached. "The lake narrows. It just flows right into the rock." "All right," Ethan said. "Let's go." He lit 2 of the fish oil torches from the fire. They sputtered, smoked, and then caught, casting a flickering, warm orange light, a stark contrast to the cavern's cool green. "One torch at the front, one at the back," Ethan commanded. "I'll take point with Ryan. Sarah, Mark, you take the rear. Everyone else in the middle. We stay together. We don't stop until we have to." The small column of 11 people, lit by their 2 smoky, flickering torches, walked away from their camp. They left the waterfall, the fire, and the safety of the open cavern, and headed into the unknown. The vast lake, as Ryan had promised, began to narrow. The rock walls closed in, and the water, which had been still, began to move. They found themselves at the mouth of a new tunnel, a perfect, low arch. A river, perhaps 20 feet wide and a few feet deep, flowed steadily but not violently into this black, new tunnel. This was the outflow. This was the way out. It's going to be cold," Sarah said, her voice apprehensive. "It's the price of escape," Ethan said. He held his torch high. The light barely penetrated the darkness of the tunnel. "This is the point of no return. Once we go in, the current will make it almost impossible to come back. Is everyone ready?" He was met with 11 grim, determined nods. "All right," Ethan said. He took the first step off the rocky shore and into the river. The water was ice cold. It was a physical shock, a frigid, painful bite that stole his breath. He heard the others gasp as they followed him in, the water swirling around their knees. They were in. The river was moving, pushing them, guiding them. They were a small, fragile island of light and life in a world of cold, flowing darkness. The journey was a waking nightmare. The only sound was the splash, splash, splash of their own waiting footsteps and the constant steady gurgle of the river. The light from their torches cast huge, monstrous shadows on the tunnel walls, which were slick and black. The air was cold, and their wet clothes, caked in the ash of the chasm, did nothing to keep them warm. They shivered, but they walked. For an hour, they pushed against the current. No, with the current. Finn had to remind himself. They were going with the flow. The rock, Ryan said, his voice chattering, his hand on Ethan's shoulder. It's not lava rock. It's limestone. The water, it carved this. This is a natural cave system. Which means it's unstable, Ethan said, his eyes scanning for he didn't know what. Which means, Ryan countered, it has to have an exit. A river always has an exit. They walked for what felt like another hour. Torches sputtered, the fish oil burning with a smoky, acrid smell. The group was flagging, their bodies numb from the cold water. We have to rest, Ethan, Mark called from the back. The water, it's too cold. Almost, Ethan said, pushing them. We rest on dry land, not in the water. But the tunnel showed no sign of a shore. It was just the river, wall to wall. Then a new sound. First, it was a low rumble, felt more than heard. But it was growing. A deep, steady roar up ahead. What is that? Sarah yelled, her voice tight with new fear. I don't know, Ethan said. He held his torch higher. The river was speeding up. Current, once a gentle guide, was now pulling them. Hold on to each other, Finn yelled. They rounded a bend in the tunnel, and the floor dropped away. Finn stopped just in time, grabbing Ryan. The group piled up, staring. In front of them, the river and the tunnel plunged into a black, roaring abyss. It was a waterfall, a massive, internal, underground waterfall. The water they were standing in was accelerating, pouring over the edge into a chasm of spray and noise. The map! Finn yelled at his brother over the roar. What is this? Ryan, his face pale in the torchlight, was looking down, his mind racing, his eyes calculating. He looked not scared but excited. This is it, he yelled back. This is right. The survey, it called this the first descent. It's a drop of maybe 50 feet. This is the path. We have to jump? Sarah shrieked. No! Ryan yelled. The map, it showed a path. A goat path. Look, on the side. Finn swung his torch. On the right-hand wall, slick with spray, was a narrow, treacherous-looking ledge, barely a foot wide, carved by the water, leading down alongside the roaring waterfall. This is it, Ethan said, his voice grim. The real test. A one slip and you're gone. One file. Watch your footing. Chapter 20, The First Descent. The roar was a physical thing, a solid wall of sound that vibrated in their bones and made their teeth ache. The air was so thick with icy, atomized spray that it was hard to breathe. They were standing at the top of a 50-foot drop, a black, thundering abyss. And their only way down was a wet, algae-slicked ledge no wider than a man's boot. The torches! Sarah screamed from the back of the line, her voice barely audible over the din. She held up her torch. The fish oil-soaked rag was sputtering, the flame drowning in the spray. Ethan! It's going out. Finn looked at his own torch. It was suffering the same fate, the flame, their only life in the dark, shrinking to a tiny, hissing ember. He made a decision. A soldier's choice. Sarah! Put it out, he roared, his voice a command. Douse it. Now. Shove it in your clothes, keep it as dry as you can. We can't risk both lights. We go with one. But in the dark, she protested. It'll be darker if we lose them both, he yelled. We'll be blind. Do it. He watched as Sarah, her face a mask of terror, reluctantly smothered her torch, plunging the rear of their line into total darkness. She wrapped the precious, unburnt torch head in a dry piece of cloth from her pack of smoked fish. Now there was only Ethan's single, sputtering, smoky torch. Its wild, flickering light cast monstrous, dancing shadows, making the narrow, wet ledge seem to move. All right, Finn yelled, turning to the group. His face, lit from below, was a grim, determined mask. This is it. I go first. Ryan, your hand is on my shoulder. You do not let go. Everyone else form a chain. One hand on the wall, it's your only anchor. One hand on the person in front. Do not look down. Do not trust your eyes. Trust your feet. Feel the rock. We go slow. We go steady. We go now. Ethan stepped onto the ledge. It was like stepping onto ice. He pressed his body flat against the cavern wall, the rock vibrating from the force of the waterfall beside him. The spray was freezing, instantly soaking him to the bone. He held the torch out, away from the wall. Ryan! Come. Ryan, his face pale, did as he was told, his grip on Ethan's shoulder of ice. Next! Finn commanded. One by one, the failures stepped onto the ledge. Sarah and Mark took the rear. 11 people, a fragile human chain, inching their way down a slick 1-foot-wide path, next to a thundering 50-foot drop into blackness. The descent was a special kind of hell. The roar of the falls was so loud it was disorienting. It was impossible to think, impossible to hear. The only sensation was the ice-cold wetness, the vibrating, slick rock under their feet, and the person in front of them. Ethan's torch, their only point of reference, was a cruel joke. The flame, whipped by the wind and spray, threw shadows that made the solid rock look like a moving serpent. It was vertigo-inducing. "Don't look at the light!" Ethan yelled, his voice torn away by the roar. "Look at your feet!" They were halfway down. They were a single, slow-moving organism. And then a scream. It wasn't Ethan. It was from the middle of the line. Alex! A man named Alex, a former logistics analyst, had slipped. His foot went off the ledge. He cried out, his weight pulling the man in front of him, Mark, off balance. I'm slipping," Mark yelled, his hand flailing. The chain was breaking. "Hold," Ethan roared, pressing himself into the rock. "Do not move." The line froze. Alex was dangling, his full weight held by Sarah, who was at the rear, and the woman in front of him. His feet kicked, finding nothing. "I've got him! I've got him!" Sarah screamed, her voice raw. She had braced herself in a crack in the rock. "Mark, anchor!" "Alex, find your footing!" "Find the rock!" Alex, hyperventilating, his eyes wide with terror, slammed his foot against the wall. He found a hold. Slowly, agonizingly, Sarah and the others hauled him back onto the ledge. He was shaking, sobbing. I can't. "Yes, you can," Finn commanded, his voice a steel rod. "You are on the ledge. You are safe. Now breathe. And move." One step. Chain, shaken but unbroken, began to move again. One agonizing, slow-motion step at a time. Felt like hours. Finally, Ethan's boot hit flat ground. Not a ledge. A floor. He stumbled forward, off the path, and onto a wide, rocky beach. "I'm down," he yelled. "Keep coming. You're clear." One by one, the survivors stumbled off the ledge, collapsing onto the rocks, shaking, soaked, and freezing. Ryan fell to his knees, his body trembling with cold and exhaustion. They had made it. All 11. They were at the bottom in a new, lower cavern. The waterfall crashed into a deep, turbulent pool beside them, the spray still drenching them. Finn looked at his torch. The flame was a single blue, dying ember, hissing at the end of its oil-soaked rag. His torch was done. "Sarah," he said, his voice hoarse. "The other torch. Now." His own torch died, plunging them into darkness. "Here." Sarah's voice. He heard her fumbling. He took the dry torch from her and held the dying ember of his own against it. For one heart-stopping second, nothing. Then the new torch flared to life, bright, smoky, and strong. They had light. Finn held the new torch high. The group, huddled and freezing, let out a weak cheer. "All right," he said. "Let's see where the hell we are." He swept the light across the new cavern. The river, after its turbulent plunge, flowed out of the pool, wider now and calmer. Continued into a new, wide tunnel. But it wasn't just rock. "Ethan," Ryan said, pointing. Ethan swung the light. Ahead of them, on the far side of the river, he saw a structure. It wasn't the gleaming steel of Oratech. It was older. It was red brick, covered in a thick, white mineral leaching. It was an archway. A man-made, structural archway built into the cavern wall. The old world, the natural caves, had just run into something else. Something built. Ryan's map had led them to an intersection. The survey, Ryan whispered, his eyes wide. It didn't show this. This isn't on the map. Chapter 21, The Red Brick Arch. The 11 survivors stood on the small, rocky beach, soaked, freezing, and staring. The new torch, held high in Ethan's hand, cast a strong, flickering fish oil and cloth smoke light. It illuminated the impossible. A man-made archway. It wasn't the gleaming, sterile steel of Oratech. It was old. Red bricks, the kind Ethan hadn't seen since his childhood in the Midwest, were covered in a thick white crust of mineral efflorescence. It was an anomaly, a human footprint in a world that was supposed to be pure geology, a world that was supposed to be their secret. "No!" Ryan whispered, his voice trembling. He stumbled forward, his scientific certainty shattered. "No, this cannot be here. It wasn't on the survey. The map, it was just rock. Just the river. This is wrong." A new, cold fear, sharper than the icy water, settled on the group. Their map was flawed. Their blind spot wasn't blind. They were standing at a crossroads. The river, their known path, their outflow, flowed calmly, if ominously, into a new black tunnel to their left. It was the way Ryan had promised. But to their right on the shore was this dry, dark, silent archway. So what do we do? It was Mark. He was shivering, his arms wrapped around himself. We follow the river, right? That's the plan. That's just some old thing. We stick to the plan. We're freezing, Mark, Sarah countered, her teeth chattering. Look at it. It's dry. It's shelter. We just came down a waterfall. We're soaked. If we stay in this water, we'll have hypothermia in an hour. We need to get dry. We need to rest. We need to use that arch. Finn was torn. His mission, his plan was the river. The river was the escape route. The archway was an unknown. A variable. In his world, unknown variables were threats. It could be a trap, Ethan said, his voice low. The janitor's guardian bot, it lost us. What if this is another part of the cage? A different one? Ethan, Ryan said. He was staring at the arch, his mind working furiously. That's exactly why we have to go in. It's data. It's a piece of information that Vance had and we didn't. Why is it here? Who built it? Oratech didn't just build on this mesa, they chose it. What if they chose it because of this? If we ignore it, we're just walking into the next trap. We have to know. Ryan was right. It was a failure of intelligence to ignore a new, unknown factor. All right, Ethan made the call. New plan. We investigate. But we are cautious. He turned to the group. The 8 of you huddle here. On the shore. Get out of the river. Huddle for warmth. I'm taking the torch. Ryan, Sarah, you're with me. We go in 50 feet. Quick look. That's it. We'll be right back. The group nodded, huddling together in the darkness, a small, shivering island of humanity. Finn, torch held high, stepped toward the arch. Ryan and Sarah followed. The air coming from the opening was dry and still. He crossed the threshold. They were in a room. A perfectly preserved, brick-lined, barrel-vaulted room. It was about 20 feet square. It was dry. The roar of the waterfall behind them was instantly muted, the silence of the room almost as deafening. It's a pump house, Sarah whispered, her bioengineer's mind analyzing. Or a maintenance hub. Look. Finn swept the torch. In the center was a massive, rusted iron something. A machine. Perhaps a pump from a bygone era, long since seized with rust. Against the walls were shelves, also rusted, which had collapsed. 19th century, Ryan whispered, awestruck. This is from an old mining operation. Or a waterworks. Decades before Oratech. Decades. So we're safe? Sarah asked. It's just old. Wait, Ethan said. His light had caught something on the far wall. It wasn't the brick. It was writing. What is that? Sarah asked, moving closer. It wasn't paint. It was scratched into the brick with a sharp rock. It was a list. A list of names. Marcus, 1.16. Anya, 2.04. David, 3.10. Their dates, Ryan breathed. People, other people. Other failures. They found this place too. Finn scanned the list. There were dozens of names, each with a date. A grim, hidden memorial. They were not the first. And then his light fell to the bottom of the list. Scratched in a different hand, a more frantic, desperate scrawl was a final, terrifying message. Finn read it aloud, his voice a hoarse whisper. The Sphinx has more than one cage. The river is a lie. It knows. A cold electric shock went through them. What does that mean? Sarah's voice was a terrified squeak. The river is a lie? It knows? Ryan said, his hand pressed against the cold brick. What knows? Finn looked back out of the archway at the dark, calm, inviting river. Their path. Their escape route. I think, Ethan said, his voice grim, we just found Jacob's warning, and we're about to walk right into it. The map was wrong. Plan was wrong. They were not in a blind spot. They were in another, older, and far more sinister part of the test. Chapter 22, The Second Cage. The words, scratched into the brick, hung in the torchlight. The river is a lie. It knows. A suffocating silence, heavier and colder than the cavern, fell on the three explorers. The roar of the waterfall behind them seemed distant. No, Sarah whispered, her hand covering her mouth. The map. The river. The outflow. It was all for nothing. It can't be, Ryan said, his voice a strained whisper. He, the mapmaker, the navigator, had just been told his entire worldview was wrong. He ran his fingers over the crude lettering. Who wrote this? And what knows? Finn, his mind racing, pieced it together. The old world. The new world. The blind spot that wasn't blind. She did, Ethan said, his voice a low growl. Cassandra Vance. The Sphinx. He turned to Ryan. The corrupted file you found? The old geological survey? It wasn't corrupted, Ryan. It was planted. She led you to it. She knew you'd fail the trolley problem. You're a human variable. She needed to see what you'd do. The whole thing? Ryan's face was ashen. The chasm? The subgrid? The lake? It was all a test. The real test, Ethan said. The trolley problem was just the filter. To weed out the predictable ones, the ones who would just follow her cold, hard logic. She didn't want those. She was hunting for the failures. For us. The ones who would fight back. The ones who would find a new way. The Sphinx has more than one cage, Sarah read again, her voice trembling. This whole system, it's a maze. And the river is a lie, Ethan continued, his eyes hard. It's the last part of the test. It's the easy answer. The one she gave us. It's the false hope path. The ones who follow it, they probably just end up in another janitor processing plant. The real exit, the real answer to the riddle has to be the one she didn't tell us. He looked around the brick room. It has to be here. This room. It's the only true variable. The one thing she didn't build. He grabbed the torch from Sarah. We're not following the river. We're following the bricks. Search the room. Look for another path. A dry path. They searched, their hands running over the cold, damp bricks. Ethan, Ryan said, his voice muffled. He was behind the massive, rusted pump. There's a draft. Here. Finn joined him, holding the torch high. Behind the machine, half hidden by shadow and rust, was another, smaller archway. It wasn't the river. It was a tunnel. A dry, brick-lined maintenance shaft, just tall enough for a man to stand in. This is it, Ethan said. This is the real path. The one the other failures found. He went back to the mouth of the arch, where the other 8 survivors were huddled, shivering in the dark. New plan, he yelled, his voice echoing. The river is a trap. We found the real way out. Come. Now. Confused but trusting him, the group scrambled to their feet. They waded the last few feet across the river and one by one filed into the dry brick room. The relief of being out of the ice-cold water was palpable. This is the way, Ethan said, pointing the torch down the new black brick-lined tunnel. This is the true path. Where does it go? Mark asked. I don't know, Ethan said. But it's the only path that isn't a lie. They had one torch left. It was burning low. The fish oil was almost gone. They had maybe an hour of light. We go, Ethan said. No chain. Just fast. We run if we have to. We get out. He took the lead, and the 11 of them plunged into the brick-lined darkness. It was a different kind of tunnel. It was level. The air was still. The only sound was their own frantic footsteps. They walked for an hour. Torch was guttering, the flame a tiny blue ember. Ethan, the light, Sarah whispered, her voice tight with panic. We don't need it, Ethan said. The tunnel is straight. We can feel our way. And then he saw it. Ahead. A line. A perfect vertical line of light? No. Of steel. It was a door. The brick tunnel ended abruptly at a solid industrial steel door sealed tight. It was rusted, ancient. A dead end, Mark breathed, his voice breaking. It was all a dead end. No, Ryan said, running his hands over it. It's not. Look. On the wall next to the door was a new panel. A small, sleek Ortec scanner, its blue light pulsing softly alive. As they approached, the panel hissed. A single, sterile blue camera lens, identical to the ones that had watched Ethan in the subgrid, swiveled and focused on them. Then a voice. It was not a machine. It was a woman. Her voice was synthesized, cold, but with an echo of real human amusement. It was the voice from Ryan's assessment. So, it chimed, the sound echoing in the tiny brick tunnel. The variables have solved the maze. The disorder has found order. You have failed every test I have set. You refused logic. You rejected order. You embraced sentiment, chaos, and antiquity. It was her, Cassandra Vance, the Sphinx. Ethan stepped forward, his face a mask of rage lit by the last dying ember of their torch. We're not variables. We're human. And your test is a sick, twisted game. A long, cold silence. The blue lens word. Incorrect, the voice replied, the amusement gone. The test was the game. The trolley problem was a simple filter to remove the predictable, logical, boring minds. The real test was this. Chasm. The subgrid. The lie of the river. The group stared, horrified, as the truth settled on them. I wasn't purging failures, Mr. Carter, the voice of Cassandra Vance said. I was filtering for true innovators. For the human variable. The one thing my Janitor AI cannot simulate. Disorder. I needed to find the ones who would break the test. The ones who would fight the system. The ones who would see the lie I gave them and find their own path. The blue lens seemed to focus on Ryan. You, Ryan Carter, were expected to fail the first test. This was the second. And you, all of you, you are the only group to ever find this door. The torch died. They were in total darkness, save for the single cold blue light of the camera. You have passed, the voice said. You have proven the human variable is resourceful. A new data set I can work with. What now? Ryan whispered, his voice shaking. Do you let us go? Go? The voice was pure ice. No. That is inefficient. You have passed. You are no longer disjourter. You are main. Welcome to the real inner circle. There was a loud pneumatic hiss, clank of heavy magnetic locks. The ancient rusted steel door slid open, but it was not a cave on the other side. It was not the desert. It was a gleaming white sterile-lit elevator. An Ortec elevator, its doors open, waiting. They had escaped the chasm. They had escaped the darkness. They had solved the Sphinx's deadly riddle, only to find that the prize for winning was a newer, smaller, perfect cage.